Tonight, as the world around you settles into silence, we invite you on a journey, one as ancient as the stars and as personal as the breath you're taking right now. This is the story of water. But before we begin, a small favor. If you find peace or wonder in videos like this, we'd be incredibly grateful if you could help us reach our next milestone, 200 subscribers. It's free, and it helps us keep creating calm, thoughtful science journeys like this one. Also, let us know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always fascinating to see how we're all connected by curiosity, scattered across time zones, drifting through the same moment in our own quiet corners of the planet. Now, close your eyes, relax your shoulders, let your mind sink into stillness, because this isn't just a story about rain or oceans or rivers. It's the story of how water came to be, how it carved the earth, how it runs through you right now, and maybe, just maybe, how it flows through other worlds far away. Before there was earth, before there were clouds or ice caps or seas, there was something smaller, simpler, hydrogen, floating through the empty dark, waiting, until one day, the stars ignited, and the story of water began. So rest easy, you're exactly where you need to be. Chapter 1. Before time began, before the stars, before gravity, before even the faintest whisper of light, there was nothing. Not an empty room, not a black sky, not a place waiting to be filled, just nothing. No time ticking in the background, no darkness, no silence, because all of those things still require something to exist in. And back then, there wasn't even that. The human mind was never built to imagine a world without time or space, but we try anyway. We picture darkness, maybe a kind of void, something cold and infinite. But even that isn't right. A void is still a place. And this, whatever it was, came before even the idea of a place. There was no distance between things, because there were no things. There was no future to move toward, because the future hadn't been invented yet. And then, it began, not like fireworks, not like thunder, not even like a wave crashing in. The beginning was quieter than we think. It wasn't something exploding into space, it was space itself coming into being, stretching out in every direction at once, because direction only started to exist in that moment. It wasn't a bang in the middle of a room. It was the room itself being built from the inside out, with no edges, no floor, no ceiling, just expansion, pure and endless. In a fraction of a second, everything we now know, every star, every planet, every heartbeat, every breath, was compressed into a point so small and so dense, it didn't really take up space. It was the seed of space, the seed of time, and then, in one unimaginable instant, it bloomed. The universe didn't expand into something, it expanded into itself, because it was all that there was. In those first billionths of a second, the temperature was beyond anything we can comprehend. It wasn't just hot, it was energy, raw and formless. Particles flared into existence, and vanished almost as quickly. Time had only just started flowing, but already everything was changing faster than it ever would again. The forces that hold the universe together today, gravity, electromagnetism, the strong and weak nuclear forces, they hadn't yet separated. Back then, they were still tangled together in a single strange force, like threads in a braid that hadn't yet been pulled apart. But as the universe expanded and cooled, the braid began to loosen. Gravity split off first, the force that would one day pull dust into stars, hold moons in orbit, and keep your body resting gently against your bed as you listen now. Then came the others, unfolding one by one, each playing its role in shaping everything that followed. And still the universe grew. It grew, not into space, but as every part of it, moving away from every other part, not because it was exploding outward, but because the very fabric of reality was stretching, like dots drawn on a balloon that's being blown up. No matter where you stood, everything else seemed to be moving away. In this strange early moment, everything was energy. Matter hadn't settled yet. There were no atoms, no molecules, just a blinding storm of particles appearing and disappearing, crashing into each other, creating brief flashes of order in a sea of chaos. But slowly, the chaos cooled. As temperatures dropped, the building blocks of matter began to hold together. Quarks formed protons and neutrons. Those gathered into atomic nuclei, and after a few minutes, just minutes, the first elements were born: hydrogen and helium, the simplest, and yet the most abundant. Even now, the air we breathe, the stars we see, the water we drink, all of it begins here. And then the universe paused. For a long time, compared to its explosive start, it did very little. No stars yet, no planets, just a vast hot fog of particles and light. But even then, the seeds were there, tiny ripples in the density of space, so small we can barely imagine them, were already spreading like fingerprints across a window. These little differences would one day become everything: galaxies, clusters, voids, the cosmic web that holds it all together. And after about 380,000 years, the blink of an eye in cosmic time, the fog cleared, electrons finally settled into orbit around nuclei, and the first true atoms formed. Light, for the first time, was free to move. The universe became transparent, and that light, that very first light, is still out there, stretched thin and cold by time, but still detectable. We call it the cosmic microwave background, and when we look at it, we're seeing the afterglow of creation. That glow surrounds you even now. It washes through your room, through your body, through everything, a quiet reminder that we are all part of something ancient, something vast, something still unfolding. And as the universe kept expanding, it kept cooling. The dense plasma of its early days faded, darkness returned, but it wasn't empty anymore. There was matter, there were atoms, and in time, there would be stars. But not yet. The next chapter of the universe would be quiet, long stretches of darkness, where gravity worked in silence, pulling things together, slowly building the first sparks of light. But here in this moment, in this soft beginning, everything was still new, still hot, still humming with potential. The universe was barely awake, but it had opened its eye, and somewhere inside it, tiny, invisible, and impossibly far in the future, was the promise of everything else. Chapter 2. The First Seconds. The first seconds of the universe were not seconds in the way we understand them. Time had just begun, but it didn't tick yet. It poured, it boiled, it surged forward like a wave with no shore. In this newborn cosmos, everything happened at once and nothing stood still. Expansion wasn't a process, it was the condition of existence itself. The universe didn't grow in time. Time grew with the universe. In those earliest fractions of a moment, far less than a blink, less than a heartbeat, less than the smallest measure we have for time, the universe underwent a transformation more dramatic than anything it has done since. We call it inflation, though the word barely holds the weight of what happened. In less than a trillionth of a second, the universe expanded by a factor so large it defies meaning, not by meters or miles or even light years, but by a number followed by more zeros than there are atoms in the earth. This wasn't expansion as we know it. It was reality itself stretching, space erupting outward with no sound, no resistance, no friction, only forward. And then just as quickly it slowed. The inflation ended, the frantic blooming relaxed, and in its place the raw ingredients of reality began to settle into their first forms. The universe was still unimaginably hot, a place where temperatures were measured in trillions of degrees, where energy and matter were not yet fully separate, where everything that would ever exist was still swirling in a high-pressure storm of possibility. From this storm came particles, the most basic units of matter, appearing from energy, colliding, vanishing, appearing again. Quarks and gluons, leptons and bosons, tiny building blocks flickering in and out of existence in a chaos that obeyed strange and perfect rules. These weren't ordinary particles the way we think of things. They weren't little marbles or dust specks. They were ripples in fields, disturbances in the fabric of nature itself, born from the same laws that shape the way light bends around a star or how your breath fogs a window in the cold. But even here in this frenzy of motion and collision, there was order. Each interaction followed patterns, each decay, each transformation, every rise and fall governed by forces that had only just emerged, but already knew exactly how to behave. And so, in the fire of this first second, the foundations were being laid for atoms, for molecules, for stars, for life. And still, everything was in motion. As the seconds ticked by, real seconds now, the kind we can imagine, even if not fully understand, the universe continued to cool. What had been pure energy began to settle into mass. The most stable particles survived. The unstable ones decayed into simpler form. Out of the soup of creation came protons and neutrons, the hearts of future atoms. And these particles, as chaotic as their birth may have been, were the seeds of structure, of chemistry, of stars that would one day shine in skies no eye had yet been born to see. Around the 1 second mark, if we can call it that, the weak nuclear force began to shape the balance between protons and neutrons. The ratio mattered, though no one was there to note, because a few minutes later, when the universe cooled just enough, those protons and neutrons would begin to combine, fusing into the first nuclei, forming the cores of hydrogen and helium, the simplest elements, but the ones that would make up 99% of everything we see today. And though the process was fast by human standards, in cosmic time, it was graceful. Neutrons that didn't find partners would decay into protons. Light particles, called photons, zipped and scattered through the plasma, unable to travel far before bumping into something. The universe was bright, but that light couldn't go anywhere yet. It was a glowing fog, thick with motion, loud with energy, though silent in the way only vacuum can be. These first few minutes, these precious, brief, formative minutes, shaped everything. There would be no iron yet, no carbon, no oxygen. Those would come later, inside stars. But in these first 3 minutes, the nuclei of hydrogen, helium, and a tiny trace of lithium formed, a process we call primordial nucleosynthesis. And it stopped almost as quickly as it started, because the universe, still expanding, was cooling fast, too fast for heavier elements to form. And so it paused again. The particles were born, the light existed, but the universe remained a fog, hot, dense and glowing, but without form. No stars, no planets, no galaxies, no shadows. Still, the foundation had been laid. The rules were in place, the pieces were on the board, and gravity, that quiet, persistent sculptor, had begun its work. It was pulling on everything now, gently but relentlessly. Wherever there were tiny imperfections in the density of the early universe, slight clumps of matter, just a little heavier here, a little lighter there, gravity began to pull more material toward those spots. And though it would take millions of years before anything visible would form, the shape of the future was already sketched in those invisible ripples. It's strange to think that the gravity pulling on your body now, anchoring you gently to your bed as you listen, is the same force that gathered those early clouds of gas, the same force that one day pulled atoms together to form the earth, the same force that lets your chest rise and fall without floating away. And so the universe moved forward, second by second, slower now, cooler now, its brightness trapped inside a sea of plasma, waiting for the moment, still hundreds of thousands of years away, when atoms would finally form, and light would be free to roam. But here in these first seconds, everything that mattered had already begun. The laws, the particles, the balance, the future. And though nothing living yet stirred, the clock had started, the journey was underway, and the quiet hum of creation, though impossible to hear, would echo through everything that followed. Chapter 3: Cosmic Inflation. Before we can truly understand how the universe grew, we need to let go of what we think expansion looks like. We imagine things moving outward into space, like ripples on a pond, or smoke drifting from a fire. But cosmic inflation wasn't like that. It wasn't something moving through space. It was space itself growing, not slowly, not steadily, but in an instant so fast and vast that the numbers lose their meaning the moment we try to speak them. In the smallest fraction of a second, less than a millionth of a billionth of a billionth of a second, the entire universe expanded by an unimaginable scale. from something smaller than a proton to something far larger than a galaxy, and it did so not with a noise or a flash, but in perfect silence, because there was nothing yet to carry sound, no air, no particles, only the stretching of the fabric of space, unfolding itself in every direction at once. This wasn't just speed, this was reality growing exponentially, doubling and doubling again, so quickly that what was once invisible became cosmic, what was once nothing became space, and in that vast and sudden expansion, the seeds of all future structure were quietly planted. Tiny fluctuations, quantum jitters magnified across the newborn universe, stretched into patterns so faint, so delicate, that they would not form stars or galaxies for billions of years, but they were already there, waiting, hidden in the grain of space itself. We call it inflation, but the name barely captures what happened. It was not like a balloon inflating with breath. It was more like a single point, all of reality, folding itself outward at speeds faster than light, not breaking the rules, but rewriting them in real time, because this expansion wasn't limited by the speed of anything moving through space. It was space itself expanding, and the limits we know today hadn't settled yet. During this phase, energy was everywhere, concentrated in a strange and temporary state called the inflaton field, something we don't fully understand, a field that filled the universe and drove it to expand, faster and faster, until suddenly it stopped, not with a crash or a fade, but with a gentle transition. The inflaton field lost its energy, and in doing so, released an enormous amount of heat, flooding the universe with particles and radiation in an event we call reheating. Though the universe had never really cooled before that moment, it simply transformed, and in that transformation, time truly began to matter. With space, now expanded, with energy now spread across it, with matter beginning to emerge from that energy, the universe had reached a state where temperature, pressure and time could take root. The wild storm of inflation had settled into a calmer, slower expansion, one that would continue to this day, not as a runaway surge, but as the long breath of a universe, stretching toward the infinite. But what did inflation leave behind? It left the cosmic microwave background, not directly but indirectly by setting the conditions that would allow light to travel freely, hundreds of thousands of years later. It left behind a universe that was astonishingly smooth, the same in every direction, and yet not perfectly. Those tiny stretched-out quantum ripples created slight differences in density across the cosmos, and those differences became the blueprint of everything. Imagine the softest grain in a piece of cloth, the way some threads lie just a bit tighter than others. Inflation made that cloth. It wove the structure of space into itself, and when gravity began its slow and patient work, it followed the grain. The denser spots pulled in more matter, the emptier spots remained void, and so billions of years later, the galaxies would gather along invisible threads, forming a web across the cosmos, the cosmic web, and each node, each point of brightness, would trace back to a ripple born in that first instant of unimaginable growth. And even now, when we look deep into the sky, when we study the oldest light we can detect, we still see those patterns, faint variations in temperature, tiny asymmetries, echoes of the first moment the universe expanded faster than thought. These patterns are not random, they are the fingerprints of inflation, a whisper from the time before stars, before atoms, before light could even move freely. The strange thing is, inflation is still partly a mystery. We have theories, models, equations that describe how it might have worked, what kind of field drove it, how it ended, what it left behind, but we don't yet know what the inflaton particle is, or even if it is a particle at all. We understand its effects, we measure its consequences, but the cause itself remains just out of reach, like a shadow cast by something we cannot yet see. And yet, in the quiet of the night, when you close your eyes and listen to the hum of the air, when your thoughts begin to float and your body begins to rest, you are surrounded by the results of that first expansion. The room you lie in, the bed beneath you, the gravity that keeps you grounded, the atoms that make up your hands and lungs and bones, all of them owe their structure to that first moment, when the universe stretched itself from nothing into something wider than any mind could hold. And so cosmic inflation wasn't just an event, it was the shaping of everything, not only matter and energy, but the space between things, the space where stars would form, where light would travel, where time would flow. It set the direction of the arrow we now ride, the direction from which we can never return. And as you drift further into rest, as the quiet deepens around you and your breath settles into rhythm, know this: the silence of the early universe, the gentle birth of space, the grain of the cosmos, all of it lives on in you. You are part of the same expansion, made from the same fields, carried on the same time, and somewhere in the next chapter of this journey, the first light will finally be born. Chapter 4. The Formation of Light. For hundreds of thousands of years after the universe was born, light existed, but it was trapped. The cosmos was still a storm of charged particles, a glowing fog of protons, electrons and photons, all tangled together in a dense plasma. Every time light tried to move forward, it collided with something, an electron here, a proton there, scattered again and again, redirected, absorbed, and re-emitted, so often that it couldn't travel more than a fraction of a centimeter before being thrown off its path. The universe was bright, but not visible, full of energy, but completely opaque. It's strange to imagine a universe where light is everywhere and nowhere, where brightness fills every space but cannot be seen, like trying to look through the middle of a fire, where everything glows but nothing has shape. This was the young universe, hot, brilliant, chaotic, and blind, but time, as always, brought change. As the universe expanded, it cooled, and as it cooled, the dance of particles began to slow, energy spread out, temperatures dropped, the collisions became less violent, less frequent, and eventually, something delicate happened. The electrons began to calm down enough to settle into orbit around protons. These pairs formed the very first true atoms, mostly hydrogen, with a bit of helium, and when they did, something remarkable occurred. Suddenly, there were far fewer free electrons floating around, and without those loose charges to block its way, light could finally move. For the first time in the history of everything, photons, the tiny packets of light, could travel freely across the cosmos. The fog lifted. The universe, once a blinding soup of confusion, became clear, and that moment, simple and silent, was the birth of visibility. The moment the universe let light go, we call this event recombination. But that word doesn't quite capture its quiet wonder. It was the moment the universe exhaled, the moment brightness found direction, the moment light began its journey not just through space, but through time, because some of that very first light is still traveling now, billions of years later, stretched and cooled by the expansion of space, arriving at Earth in a form we can still detect. It's called the cosmic microwave background, a soft, cold glow coming from every direction in the sky, not bright, not loud, but constant, a whisper from the past, a picture of the universe when it was just 80,000 years old, painted in temperature differences barely measurable, but rich with meaning. When scientists look at this background, they aren't just seeing light, they're seeing memory, the earlier snapshot of structure, the imprint of those tiny ripples set during inflation, the pattern of the very first shadows, the first shapes, the first hints of where galaxies would one day be drawn. But light didn't just reveal the past, it began to shape the future. Once the fog cleared, the universe entered a new era, the cosmic dark ages, a time when there were no stars yet, no glowing objects, just gas, thin clouds of hydrogen and helium, drifting through expanding space, cooling more and more, with every passing moment. And in that darkness, gravity was at work, quietly, patiently, pulling. Wherever matter was slightly denser than its surroundings, gravity amplified the difference. Over millions of years, the clouds began to clump, the clumps began to spin, the spin became collapse. And in time, deep in the heart of those invisible structures, heat returned. Because when you compress gas, it warms. And when gravity pulls hard enough, when the pressure becomes too much, when the hydrogen begins to fuse, something happens that changes everything. A star is born, but not yet. That's a story for the next chapter. Here in this quiet phase, light is still young. The universe has just become transparent. The photons are still new to freedom. The atoms are drifting, cooling, waiting. And yet, there is something profoundly peaceful about this moment. The first time the universe could see itself, not in reflections or forms, but in the gentle flow of light across endless space, a soft beginning to all visibility, to all observation, to all seeing. It's comforting to know that this light, this first light, still surrounds us. It moves through your room now, through your body, through the earth and sky, stretched thin, cooled to microwave temperatures, but still here, still whispering the story of its birth. And when you lie still, as you are now, and close your eyes against the present world, part of your body still listens to that light, not consciously, not with eyes or ears, but with atoms, with memory, with connection, because we are not separate from that moment, we are made from it. The same light that poured across space, when the fog lifted, is the same energy that burns in your cells, the same heat you feel when the sun touches your skin, the same photons that light up your dreams behind closed eyes. The formation of light wasn't just a milestone for the universe, it was the beginning of clarity, of distance, of color and shadow. It was the moment the stage was set for everything else, for stars to shine, for planets to orbit, for eyes to evolve and take it all in. And even now, in the silence of night, as your breath slows and the world softens around you, that light continues its journey, undisturbed, untouched, eternal, moving, always, toward the next thing. Chapter 5. The breath of the sky, water, and the birth of weather. After the oceans had settled into their vast basins, and the rivers had etched their signatures into stone, after the rains had sculpted valleys and filled lakes, and after the land began to cool beneath the soft rhythm of falling water, another transformation unfolded above, a transformation quieter than thunder, yet more expansive than any sea, as water, now no longer only bound to Earth's surface, began to rise into the sky and claim the heavens as part of its endless journey. It began with warmth, the gentle heat from the young sun beaming down across the waterlogged surface of the earth, warming the shallow seas, the lakes that gathered like open eyes in the lowlands, the soaked soil of new-formed continents. And this warmth, though faint by comparison to the ancient fires that once consumed the earth, was enough to awaken a new cycle, for heat draws water upward, not in visible streams but as invisible vapor, lifting droplets into the air molecule by molecule, carrying them higher, away from their origin, into the sky. And as this vapor rose, carried by warm currents and guided by the contours of the wind, it began to cool again, gathering in the upper reaches of the atmosphere, condensing around particles of dust or salt left behind by sea spray. And slowly, quietly, almost tenderly, clouds began to form, not yet the painterly masses we see above us now, but shifting bodies of suspended water draped across the sky like veils, their shadows trailing softly across the surface of the world below. This was the birth of weather, not just temperature or climate or sky, but a living, breathing system through which water could move, not just across the land but between realms, between sea and sky, between earth and air, between the visible and the unseen, a cycle powered, not by machinery but by warmth, wind, and gravity, the oldest forces nature knows, working in harmony with the one element that could flow between all states, all places, and all forms, water. With each cycle, the atmosphere grew more complex, more dynamic, as the heat of the sun warmed the oceans unevenly, setting air in motion, creating pressure differences that pushed great currents across the globe. The trade winds, the jet streams, the monsoons, all emerging not as random gusts, but as patterns, predictable in their chaos, born of balance, born of imbalance, all driven by the endless conversation between the ocean below and the air above. And into this swirling dance came the clouds, not as decorations in the sky, but as instruments of change, their shapes and densities determining how much sunlight would reach the earth, how much heat would be trapped, how much rain would fall, and where each one a complex structure of vapor and air, reflecting sunlight back into space, or trapping warmth within, deciding, day by day, the temperature of the planet, the direction of the winds, the strength of the storms to come. Rain, once the dominant sculptor of Earth's surface, now became part of a broader orchestra, a precipitation not as a flood of creation, but as a cycle of renewal, part of a rhythm that included evaporation, condensation, wind, pressure, temperature, all of it shifting together, all of it governed by water's ability to change form effortlessly, to become gas, liquid, or solid, depending only on the touch of energy. And then came the extremes, for just as water can fall gently as mist, it can also roar as thunder, flash as lightning, spiral as hurricane, because with weather came not only balance, but instability, and with instability came storms, storms born of rising warm air and falling cold air, of humidity and friction, of ocean temperatures, and shifting jet streams, and in those storms, water revealed another face, not only as life-bringer, but as force, as power, as something that could tear down as easily as it built. Lightning split the sky above, thunder rolled across young forests and bare plains, hail fell from the heavens like stone, and the planet learned that water in the sky could be both tender and terrible, a duality that would define the millennia to come. Snow began to fall in regions where the temperature dropped low enough, coating the land in silent white, preserving moisture through the cold seasons, setting the rhythm of seasons into motion, a rhythm that would over time become the pulse by which life would grow and sleep, and grow again. And so the atmosphere, once dry, once thin, once silent, became filled with movement and memory, a canvas upon which water could paint its moods, blue and clear one day, heavy and grey the next, brilliant with lightning, or soft with drizzle, or echoing with the deep boom of thunderclouds forming over the mountains and drifting slowly out to sea. The Earth's surface, once only shaped by the direct contact of water with rock, now found itself shaped by something broader, by climate zones, by rainfall patterns, by long-term fluctuations in temperature that guided the advance and retreat of ice, the rise and fall of forests, the opening and closing of entire ecosystems, all of it made possible because water had learned to fly, had risen into the sky and had decided never to leave it again. And with every rise and fall, with every storm and every beam of sunlight filtered through a vapor-filled sky, the Earth became more stable, more temperate, more ready for the flourishing of life, which by now was beginning to multiply in the ocean, to adapt to the changing cycles of light and dark, heat and cold, wet and dry, all of it choreographed by the rhythms of weather, the slow breath of the sky. From this moment forward there would never be a day on Earth without clouds, never a year without rain, never a century without drought, never an age without climate, because water had claimed, not just the seas and the rivers, but the air itself, turning the planet into a living, cycling, breathing system, where everything was connected by the invisible threads of vapor and wind and storm. And this weather, this great invisible architecture of motion, would not only shape the land, but steer the future of every living thing, every migration, every seed carried by the breeze, every fire quenched by sudden rain, every ancient tree twisted by constant wind, every shoreline redrawn by the march of a hurricane, every desert sculpted by evaporation and the absence of clouds. Water, having once only fallen, now rose, and in rising, it changed the world above just as it had changed the world below. The Earth had found its breath, and it would never exhale the same way again. Chapter 6. The Ice That Remembers. Water in its coldest form. As the breath of the sky grew deeper and more complex, as clouds traveled from sea to land and back again, as storms raged and rivers coiled across the surface of the world like living veins, another chapter in the story of water began to unfold, not in movement, not in flow, but in stillness, in silence, in the exquisite slowness of freezing, where water for the first time became something other than movement. It became memory, locked in the crystalline stillness of ice. It began at the edges, in the shadows of tall mountains, where the sun could not reach, in the high altitudes where the air grew thin and cold, in the long winters of the far poles, where the warmth of the sun arrived too weak and too fleeting to melt the snow that had fallen the season before, and so the snow remained, and more came, and it began to compact under its own weight, transforming into ice not suddenly, but gradually, layer upon layer, year after year, pressing the air from within itself, becoming denser, harder, and more permanent with each passing season. In these quiet places, untouched by rivers and unshaken by tides, water found a new shape, not as rain or stream or vapor, but as glaciers, as ice sheets, as frozen oceans, as slow-moving giants that would come to sculpt the face of the earth, just as thoroughly as any river had done before. And here is where water's true mastery becomes clear, for it can cut with flow, and it can also carve with stillness, for glaciers, though they may seem solid and inert, are always moving, always shifting, inch by inch, year by year, pulled by gravity and the accumulation of weight, flowing like rivers frozen in time, grinding rock beneath them into fine powder, scouring valleys into shape, flattening entire regions of land, with the sheer pressure of their slow-motion advance. The great ice ages of Earth, those long cycles of cold that came and went over hundreds of thousands of years, were not just winters writ large, they were planetary pauses, seasons of global stillness, times when ice expanded from the poles into the heart of continents, when entire landscapes were buried beneath miles of frozen water, when oceans shrank as water was locked away in glaciers, and sea levels fell, exposing land bridges that would one day carry animals, people, languages, and stories from one part of the world to another. And when those ages ended, when the climate shifted again, and the sun returned with greater strength, the ice retreated, but it did not vanish without a trace, for wherever it had been, it left behind the unmistakable marks of its passage, U-shaped valleys, massive boulders, transported far from their source, long ridges of gravel and stone called moraines, deep lakes, gouged into the earth by ice's grinding retreat, all of it evidence of a presence that does not announce itself with noise, but with transformation. And within the ice itself, something astonishing was preserved, not just water, but time, for every snowfall that landed and was pressed into ice, trapped within it tiny bubbles of air from the atmosphere at the time it fell, and as layer upon layer was added, the ice became a timeline, a frozen archive of the planet's breath, holding within its structure the exact composition of the atmosphere from tens, hundreds, even thousands of centuries ago. By drilling deep into these ancient ice sheets, in Antarctica, in Greenland, in the glaciers of the tallest mountains, scientists can read the history of the world, measuring the levels of carbon dioxide and methane, analyzing particles of volcanic ash, or pollen, or dust carried on winds from long-lost landscapes, reconstructing a record of climate change, of seas of catastrophes, of recoveries, all written not in ink, but in frost. This is water not just as a force, not just as a substance, but as a witness, and in some places it has waited, unchanged for hundreds of thousands of years, holding its secrets in silence, waiting for us to ask the right questions, waiting for us to remember that it remembers everything, the warmth of ancient summers, the long shadows of ice-bound winters, the rhythm of life and loss, traced through every crystal. Even snow, which seems so delicate, so temporary, is part of this long memory, for every snowflake is unique, shaped by the precise temperature, humidity and air currents it encounters as it falls, and though it melts quickly in your hand, it carries the signature of the sky from which it came, a whisper of its own journey from vapor to crystal to water again. And in the high mountains, the snow that does not melt becomes something more. It becomes a glacier's beginning, the first pages in a slow book that will take millennia to write. As that snow compresses into ice, begins to move, begins to flow, begins to shape. Ice also changes the very light of the world, where it covers the ground in blankets of white. It reflects sunlight back into space, cooling the planet, regulating the balance of heat and cold. And as the polar regions become more covered in ice, the earth grows cold, a feedback loop of reflection and temperature that has governed many of the great swings in global climate over the ages. And yet, this same ice, if it melts too quickly, if it flows too fast into the sea, can change that balance dramatically, causing sea levels to rise, coastlines to vanish, climates to shift, species to migrate or vanish, entire ecosystems to collapse or adapt. For water, even in its stillest form, is never static in its consequence. In frozen lakes high in the Arctic, in glaciers perched precariously above alpine valleys, in the ancient heart of Antarctica's buried ice, the story of water continues not in sound, but in silence, not in motion, but in memory, and we are only just beginning to understand how much that ice can tell us, how much it holds, how much it still protects, because ice, unlike vapor or rain, is a long-term promise. It is the water that waits. It is the water that holds its breath, and when it melts, it releases not just water, but history, not just cold, but revelation. So the next time you touch frost on glass, or watch snow drift past a window, or see the glint of a glacier from afar, know that you are witnessing one of the most delicate and powerful manifestations of water's will, a moment of pause in the story of flow, a single frame from a film that spans a memory so old it has forgotten nothing, and within that stillness lies the breath of worlds, the echo of time, and the quiet frozen promise that even when all else changes, water remains, watching, waiting, remembering. Chapter 7. The Sky's Secret River. How water shapes weather from above. Long after the oceans had settled into their restless rhythm, long after the rivers had carved their paths into the bones of the continents, and the glaciers had crept across the land and retreated again in silence, the story of water continued not only on the ground or beneath the surface, but in the invisible rivers that flowed through the sky itself, vast, unseeable currents of vapor that span thousands of kilometers, weaving their way through the atmosphere like ghostly serpents, carrying the weight of oceans without ever touching the ground, sculpting climates, seeding rain, and guiding the fate of entire ecosystems without ever being seen by the human eye. These rivers in the sky, sometimes called atmospheric rivers, are not marked by water in its liquid form, not by droplets or mist or clouds, but by vapor, by invisible moisture carried in narrow bands that stretch across oceans and continents alike, a stream of concentrated humidity pulled across the globe by wind and heat and pressure, often transporting more water in a single day than all the rivers on Earth combined could ever carry in a week. And yet we do not hear them, we do not see them, and we often do not even know they are passing overhead until the rain begins to fall and the sky opens its hands. These sky rivers form as the sun warms the oceans, unevenly, causing evaporation to rise in vast columns from the surface, especially in the tropics, where the sun's light is most direct and unrelenting, and this vapor is then carried by high-altitude winds shaped by the spin of the earth, guided by mountain ranges twisted by pressure systems, until it arrives far from where it began, heavy with moisture, ready to fall as rain or snow if only the air would cool enough to let go. And so these vapor rivers drift silently overhead, vast and potent, flowing through the troposphere with quiet strength, delivering their cargo to wherever the atmosphere permits, creating the storms that flood cities and nourish crops, bringing drought-ending rains or unleashing destructive deluges, depending not on intent but on the delicate balance of temperature and pressure that governs whether the sky will hold or release its water. When these rivers reach mountain ranges, like the Sierra Nevada in North America or the Andes in South America, the rising terrain forces the warm, moist air upward where it cools rapidly, causing the vapor to condense into clouds and then into rain, and the result can be dramatic: flash floods, landslides, sudden snowfall measured not in inches but in meters, all because an invisible river met an immovable wall and decided to pour itself out in surrender. And yet without these skyborne rivers, many of the world's most fertile regions would be deserts. The vineyards of California, the rainforests of Chile, The monsoon-fed farms of India, all of them rely, whether they realize it or not, on these flowing bands of atmospheric moisture to deliver the rains that make life possible, that feed rivers, that fill aquifers, that keep forests green and soils rich. But just as they give, these rivers can also overwhelm. When too much moisture arrives too quickly, when the soil cannot absorb what falls, when the balance is tipped even slightly, these weather systems become destructive, erasing roads, toppling bridges, drowning fields and homes, and reminding us once again that water, no matter how gentle in the beginning, always holds the power to transform, and transformation is not always kind. In between these great flows, the atmosphere still brims with smaller, subtle emotions, clouds that form in place and disappear, fog that clings to the surface and muffles sound, dew that condenses on leaves at dawn and evaporates by morning, each a miniature version of the larger cycle, each part of the same invisible ballet where water moves upward and downward and sideways through the air, guided by the breath of the planet, never still for long. Even the jet stream, that high-altitude wind that snakes around the globe, helps steer these sky rivers, bending them northward or southward, allowing them to linger or sending them rushing forward, dictating whether a region experiences drought or flood, clear skies or days of grey rain, a garden's bloom or a field's ruin, and all of it, always dependent on water's ability to rise as vapor, to travel unseen, and to return in a form that touches everything it meets. And in the midst of all this motion, there is still the human being standing below the clouds, looking up, wondering if it will rain today, perhaps reaching out a hand when the first drop falls, perhaps watching the storm approach across the horizon, or hearing the wind change, or feeling the pressure drop, small, fragile, and yet profoundly connected to the sky above, whether through the crops we plant or the water we drink, or the very air we breathe, which has been shaped, cooled, warmed and moistened by water that rose into the atmosphere days or weeks ago and is only now coming back down. Weather forecasts speak in percentages and but beneath all of it lies the ancient truth, that water is always moving, always circling, always cycling from the ground to the sky and back again, in forms both visible and invisible, in rhythms both predictable and wild, and that these rivers of the air are just as vital, just as alive, just as powerful as the rivers that run through canyons or surge between banks. There are no banks to contain them, no deltas to define their end, but still they shape the world, still they flow, still they carry the breath of oceans across entire continents, and return as rain in lands where no ocean can be seen, reminding us that every storm has a history, every drop has traveled farther than we know, and the water we feel on our skin began its journey long before we were ever aware of its presence. These sky rivers, silent and unseen, are the lifeblood of climate itself. They are the veins of the atmosphere, and even now as you breathe in and out, they are moving above you, shaping tomorrow. Chapter 8. The Salt of the Sea, the Chemistry of Oceans and the Origins of Life. The oceans, vast and ceaseless in their motion, have always seemed eternal, stretching out to the horizon, reflecting the sky in shifting shades of blue and silver, holding the memory of storms, the rhythm of tides, the migration paths of life itself. But what few ever truly consider is that the ocean is not simply water, not simply vast emptiness, but a living solution, a brew billions of years in the making, rich with minerals, elements, and ancient salts dissolved, drop by drop from the land, carried grain by grain from mountaintop to delta, whispered into the waves, by wind and time and rain, until the sea itself became a chemical archive of Earth's slow transformation. In the beginning, when the early rains fell, and the rivers first began their descent from newly lifted landmasses, the water they carried was not pure. It was already heavy with material eroded from rock, the minerals loosened by weathering, dissolved by carbonic acid, formed when rainwater mixed with the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and in that mixture were the earliest traces of sodium, chloride, calcium, potassium, magnesium, the building blocks of the salt we now taste in every mouthful of seawater, the very components that give the ocean its unique and eternal character. This process was not quick, and the sea did not begin as salty, It became salty slowly, as each river delivered its load of dissolved ions, as each volcanic eruption added sulfur and other gases into the air, which then dissolved in rain and were swept into the sea, as each moment of erosion, each breath of wind, each flash of lightning added its trace to the growing mixture, and over millions of years, the oceans became the saltiest bodies of water on Earth, not by accident, but by accumulation, a patient layering of chemistry shaped by geology, weather and time. And it is this salinity, this precise, balanced blend of elements, that made the ocean not only a vast reservoir of water, but a cradle of life, for life could not have arisen in pure water alone. It needed an environment rich with dissolved mineral, with charges and ions that could move between molecules, that could create gradients, that could allow energy to be stored and released, signals to be sent, boundaries to form, reactions to occur. And in the salty soup of the early ocean, the first cells found exactly what they needed. The earliest life forms, tiny, fragile, unthinking, emerged not in isolation, but in communion with the sea, absorbing its chemistry, mirroring it inside their own membranes, becoming living reflections of the water they inhabited, their internal fluids as salty as the sea itself, their existence proof that life is not something added to water, but something water makes possible, something it builds, something it invites when the conditions are right. Even today, your blood contains salts in nearly the same proportion as seawater. Your tears, your sweat, all echo the ocean that gave rise to your ancestors. Because though we live on land, we never truly left the water. We carry it within us, not just as hydration, not just as necessity, but as heritage, as the medium through which life speaks to itself. The salt in the ocean is more than flavor, it is memory, and that memory goes deep, deep beneath the surface, where light cannot reach, where the pressure grows immense and the temperature drops close to freezing. The ocean is still alive with movement, currents that circle the globe, carrying not just heat, but minerals, nutrients and organisms. Thermo-Halian circulation, often called the ocean conveyor belt, driven by differences in salinity and temperature, pushing deep cold water from the poles toward the equator, and pulling warm surface water back again. An invisible engine powered by salt and heat, and gravity, turning slowly but powerfully, influencing the climate of every continent, the migration of whales, the bloom of plankton, the breath of forests, far from any shore. This motion too was shaped by salt, for as water freezes near the poles, the ice that forms excludes salt, making the surrounding water heavier, denser, causing it to sink and set the deep currents in motion. And as evaporation pulls water into the sky near the equator, leaving the salt behind, the surface water grows saltier and heavier still, further strengthening the great global circulation that keeps the climate in balance, that brings rain to some, and drought to others, that keeps deserts dry and forests wet, that gives rhythm to the seasons and order to the chaos of weather. And in this salt-rich sea, life evolved, slowly, diversely, profoundly, from single-celled wanderers to colonies, from colonies to multicellular beings, from floating forms to swimming ones, from soft-bodied creatures to those with shells made of calcium pulled from the water, to fish with bone, to the astonishing branching tree of life that now includes jellyfish, sea stars, crustaceans, squids, sharks, and eventually mammals that return to the water, carrying lungs, where once there were gills, speaking again with the salt they never truly lost. Every drop of ocean water contains not just water and salt, but life itself, bacteria, plankton, viruses, drifting larvae, invisible eggs, fragments of ancient DNA, cells dividing, creatures feeding, a soup of biology suspended in chemistry, a constantly moving, constantly breathing body, whose surface glitters in the sun, but whose heart beats in the dark. And yet, the salt of the ocean also speaks of age, for while freshwater lakes and rivers continually refresh and replace their content, cycling through the land with rain and evaporation, the salt of the ocean remains, growing ever so slightly more concentrated, as time passes, a record of the minerals the Earth has given up, a measure of the planet's long erosion, a concentration of all that has been washed away. And it is not just Earth's surface that gives the ocean its character. At the boundaries where tectonic plates meet on the ocean floor, hydrothermal vents spew superheated, mineral-rich water into the sea, feeding entire ecosystems that rely not on sunlight but on chemistry, life that thrives in total darkness, in crushing pressure, in waters infused with hydrogen sulfide, methane and metals, communities of organisms that draw their energy not from photosynthesis, but from chemosynthesis, proving again that where water and chemistry combine, life will follow, even in the most extreme and inhospitable places. These deep-sea vents not only sustain life, they alter the chemistry of the ocean itself, balancing the salts, adding elements to the water column, reshaping the layers of the sea from below, showing that the ocean is not merely a passive basin, but a dynamic, layered, evolving system, one in constant dialogue with the crust beneath and the sky above. So when you look out at the sea, when you taste the salt on your lips carried on the wind, when you watch the foam curl and fall against the shore, you are not simply witnessing water, you are witnessing a living archive, a breathing labyrinth, a body of memory and transformation older than any mountain, more fluid than any wind, more constant than any storm. The ocean is salt because the earth gave it salt. The ocean is life because water knows how to build it, and deep within its waves, in the chemistry that now flows through your own veins, the story continues, not in silence, not in stillness, but in a language written in sodium and chloride, in ions and currents, in breath and blood, because salt is not only flavor, it is the soul of the sea, and the sea is where we began. Chapter 9. The Whispering Forests. How water gave rise to green life on land. Before there were forests, before leaf or limb or stem had ever reached toward sunlight, the land was barren, rough and silent under the wide sky, a place of rock and dust and wind, shaped by water, yet not yet home to it, a place awaiting something soft, something living, something that could take root and breathe. And it was water, always water, that would make that transformation possible, bringing not only erosion and rain, but nourishment, motion, chemistry, and connection to a world that had never known such color, never heard the rustling hush of green life swaying beneath the open sky. For a long time, life remained in the oceans, where water was everywhere, where support and nutrients and protection came naturally, where the earliest creatures swam, floated and drifted without fear of drying, of heat, of exposure. But somewhere in the shallows, where tides retreated and the shore was revealed in brief windows of sunlight and air, certain organisms began to experiment with something new, not moving, but anchoring, not drifting, but holding fast, not floating, but reaching. These were the ancestors of plants, not yet trees or moss or flowers, but simple algae, filamentous, flexible, photosynthetic, able to capture sunlight and turn it into energy, able to absorb minerals from the water around them. And over time, as they began to explore the edges between sea and land, they began to adapt, slowly, generation by generation, to a world where water was no longer everywhere, but had to be drawn in, preserved, managed. To live on land required more than roots. It required a relationship with water unlike anything that had come before, one that balanced the need to take it in with the danger of losing it, one that understood how to carry it upward through tissues, how to store it in cells, how to shape every part of the body around the movement, the scarcity and the gift of water. And so plants evolved, first the simplest mosses and liverworts, soft and low, clinging to damp stone and shaded crevices, drinking from mist and rain, thriving only where moisture was abundant. And then, as time stretched onward, came vascular plants, plants with internal plumbing, with xylem to carry water upward, with stomata to open and close in rhythm with humidity and sunlight, with roots that reach deep, and leaves that spread wide. And with each new adaptation, water became not only life-giver, but life-shaper. With water came height, with water came structure, With water came forest. The first forests were not like those we know today. They were composed of strange, towering ferns, of horsetails thick as trees, of lycophytes that climbed into the air with stiff, spiny trunks. But they were forests nonetheless, and they changed the land in ways nothing else had ever done before. Their roots broke rock and held soil. Their leaves softened the light and altered the wind. Their fallen trunks formed layers of peat and carbon that would one day become coal, and through all of it they drank. Water entered through the soil, climbed their trunks, spread through their tissues, evaporated into the air, from their leaves in a process called transpiration, and in doing so, they became part of a new cycle, a land-based echo of the ocean's own dance, a terrestrial symphony of flow. And this flow did not stop with the plants. As vegetation spread across the continents, water began to move differently, not simply running across bare rock, but soaking into roots, into spongy soil, into the porous structures of bark and wood. It lingered longer, it moved slower, it gathered in shaded pools beneath leafy canopies, and the rivers that once surged in sudden floods began to level out, to meander, to find new patience in the shelter of the forest. Rainfall changed too. Trees, with their vast canopies, slowed the fall of raindrops, broke their speed, allowed them to drip gently onto the earth rather than striking it with force, and in doing so they reduced erosion, preserved topsoil, allowed delicate networks of fungi and bacteria to thrive beneath the surface. And through the process of transpiration, the steady release of water vapor from leaves into the air, forests helped seed the sky with moisture, helping to form clouds, helping to cool down rain, helping to sustain, not just themselves but entire regional climate. The Amazon rainforest, for example, recycles much of its own water. The trees there, drawing moisture from deep in the ground, release it into the atmosphere where it condenses and falls again as rain, a loop sustained not by oceans or rivers alone, but by the very breath of the forest. It is a communion, a partnership between plant and sky, between leaf and cloud, between earth and air, all held together by water, moving upward and downward in an endless pulse. And within these forests the stage was set for something else, for oxygen levels to rise, for new ecosystems to flourish, for insects and amphibians to creep from the wet shadows, for reptiles to bask in the warmth between leaves, for birds to one day take flight through the branches, and for mammals to begin their slow climb into the canopy, toward curiosity, toward awareness. Without water, the forests would never have come. Without water, the land would have remained a silence of stone and dust. But with water came roots, and with roots came trees, and with trees came the possibility of home, not for one species but for millions. And still today it is water that feeds the forests. The rain that falls on the mountain is carried through root and trunk and leaf and sky, falling again in the valley below, beginning again in a drop upon a fern's green blade, beginning again in a dewdrop trembling at dawn. It is in the forest that water becomes visible again, not just as flood or river, but as shimmer, as mist, as glisten, as the scent of wet bark and moss, as the breath of green things exhaling in the heat. And if you listen closely you will hear it, not as roar, but as whisper, the whisper of leaves touched by rain, the whisper of fog moving between trunks, the whisper of water, always water, turning sunlight into life, silence into song, stone into root. Because when water met the land, it gave rise not only to plants but to places where life could gather in shelter, in shade, in peace. And so the earth began to breathe, and so the green began to grow, and the world at last began to bloom. Chapter 10. The Gift of the Cloud. How water carries light through the sky, high above the treetops, beyond the reach of the tallest mountains, and the hum of forests below, where the air thins and the wind sharpens. Water continues its eternal journey, not as river or rain, not as glacier or sea, but as cloud, drifting silently through the sky, a body made not of solidity or permanence, but of transformation itself, a delicate balance of vapor and light, of motion and rest, carrying the story of earth across the heavens, like a living breath, written in mist. Clouds are not things to be touched, though we have passed through them in plains, and seen them tumble across valleys from mountaintops. They are not things to be held, though every photograph captures their shape for a moment in time, because clouds are not truly objects, but processes, endless reactions held together by warmth and condensation, a quiet miracle of water vapor, gathering into visible form, held aloft by rising air, suspended by the very balance between gravity's pull and the atmosphere's gentle resistance. They form when warm, moist air rises, lifted by terrain, by heat, by wind, and as it ascends, it begins to cool, until it reaches the dew point, the moment where air cannot hold all its moisture, and so the vapor condenses around tiny particles of dust, sea salt, or pollen, becoming droplets so small, so light, they do not fall but remain suspended, billions of them clustered together, scattering sunlight, reflecting color, softening the edge of the sky into the ever-changing forms we call clouds. They are the sky's handwriting, ever shifting, ever speaking, telling us of the air's movement, the heat of the ground, the breath of the ocean below, revealing through their shape and speed and color the story of what has been, what is, and what might be to come. Some clouds gather low and heavy, pregnant with rain, dragging gray shadows across the earth, whispering thunder before the first drop falls. Others stretch high and feathered, like brushstrokes painted by unseen hands, barely clinging to the upper reaches of the atmosphere, fragile and cold and luminous at dusk. Still others rise like towers, immense and brooding, cumulonimbus, the great storm bearers, swelling with energy and promise, swirling with lightning and wind, formed when moisture-laden air is lifted violently upward, building upon itself, feeding on heat, until it becomes a living column of sky that can drop hail and rain and fury upon the land below. And yet, all of them, whether light and playful or vast and dark, are made of the same thing, tiny droplets of water, born of invisible vapor, born of sun-warmed sea and river and leaf, gathered together in the thin air to become not just visible but powerful. It is through clouds that water travels across great distances, moved by jet streams, guided by mountains, pulled by fronts of warm and cold air colliding, and in their drifting, in their slow migration across continents, they carry the potential for life, for rainfall on parched fields, for snowpack in the highlands, for morning dew in the forest clearing, for rivers to rise again. They are messengers of balance, too few clouds, and the earth burns beneath the unfiltered sun. Drought stretches its fingers across the soil, fires ignite, and life retreats into dormancy. Too many clouds, and light is blocked, temperatures cool, crops fail to ripen, disease spreads in the damp, and the rhythms of the season falter. But when the balance holds, when the sky holds just enough cloud to cool the day, to shield the night, to shade the valley while letting sunlight still pass, then the planet breathes evenly, and water flows just as it must. Beyond their role in delivering rain, clouds also play a subtler part. They regulate the Earth's temperature, acting as a kind of insulating blanket, reflecting some sunlight back into space by day, and trapping outgoing infrared radiation by night, helping to soften the extreme, to keep the atmosphere within the narrow window in which life can thrive. This dual nature of shielding and trapping, of cooling and warming, is part of what makes clouds so complex, so difficult to predict, so full of paradox, and yet so essential to the Earth's ability to host light. Even the play of light through them, the way sunrise turns their edges to fire, the way sunset turns their bellies to gold, the way moonlight paints them in silver, is not just beauty but physics. Light scattering through billions of droplets, bending, filtering through water held delicately in air, creating color, creating awe, reminding us that even the most basic substance can, under the right conditions, become art. And within those moments, within that glow, we are reminded of something ancient, that clouds are not merely a forecast, not merely a backdrop. They are part of the language of the planet, part of how the Earth communicates, part of the deep rhythm that began when vapor first rose from the sea, and learned how to linger in the air. Even as they rain, even as they vanish, clouds shape the land. They determine where rivers are born, where deserts stretch wide, where forests gather their lushness, and where tundras remain thin and sparse. And above all else, they carry memory. For every cloud that forms today is made from water that has been part of 1,000 other clouds, 1,000 other storms, has fallen on ancient cities, has run through the roots of forgotten forests, has carved canyons, and fed seeds and cooled the skin of creatures long extinct. Water that has risen and fallen again and again, through cycles too vast for any one person to hold in their mind, but which the earth itself remembers with every whisper of wind, with every shadow that passes across the field. To watch a cloud is to watch time. To follow a cloud is to follow the journey of oceans through the air. To listen to a cloud, if such a thing were possible, would be to hear the hum of the earth breathing, the soft voice of a planet carrying water from the sea to the sky to the land and back again. So next time you look up and see one drift across the sun, know that you are watching not just vapor, but history, not just shape, but motion, water in the act of remembering, water in the form of passage, because every cloud is a story, and every story begins with water learning how to write. Chapter 11. The Living Mirror. Lakes' reflections, and the stillness of water. After the rivers had carved their winding paths across the continents, after the mountains had been softened by rain and the valleys filled by glacial melt, after the clouds had learned to whisper across the sky, and the forests had stretched their roots deep into soil watered by seasons, there came another shape of water, one that did not flow as a river, or crash like a sea, or rise like vapor, but one that waited, that lingered, that held its breath in great bowls of land and sky, gathering the world into its surface in silence. The lake. A lake is not merely a body of water trapped by land, not merely an accidental pool formed by runoff or retreating glaciers. It is a kind of stillness unlike any other, a pause in the motion of water, a moment in its great journey where the currents, slow and the surface begins to speak in reflections, turning the sky upside down, doubling the mountains, holding the shape of clouds for a moment longer than the wind alone would allow. Lakes form in many ways in volcanic craters, where explosions once tore holes in the Earth's crust, in depressions left behind by the slow grinding of glaciers, in the folds of fault lines and between ridges of stone, or simply where rainfall and rivers have no easy escape, and though each begins in motion, in violence or descent, they settle into something quieter, something more contemplative, something that seems to listen more than speak. And yet, for all their stillness, lakes are not lifeless. They are alive with motion just beneath the surface, with invisible currents stirred by temperature, by wind, by the inflow of streams and the outflow of rivers. And in that movement, subtle though it may be, there is mixing, there is breathing, there is a kind of circulation that keeps the lake from becoming stagnant, that brings oxygen to its depths and nutrients to its surface, that supports life in layers and patterns more intricate than the eye can follow. In the summer, many lakes become layered, with warm water at the surface, cooler water beneath, and the coldest, heaviest water resting at the bottom, and these layers do not easily mix, each one forming a habitat of its own, with different creatures, different chemistry, different light, a vertical world held together by temperature, by density, by the invisible rules of physics. Then in autumn or spring, when the air cools or warms, the temperatures begin to balance, and the lake overturns, the layers break apart, and the waters mix again, a moment of transformation that brings fresh oxygen to the depths and carries nutrients upward, feeding new blooms of algae, awakening the fish from their stillness, stirring the entire lake back into motion, into light. And beneath the surface, in that cool dark, where the sunlight fades into blue and the noise of the world above becomes a distant hush, water holds entire ecosystems, from the microscopic plankton that float and feed and multiply, to the great fish that hunt in the shadow, to the rooted plants that sway with each passing ripple, to the silent decomposition of fallen leaves and ancient matter, resting slowly at the bottom, becoming part of the lake's memory, because a lake is not just a mirror for the sky, it is a memory of the land. Every stone that rolls into its basin, every leaf that falls in autumn, every raindrop that carries minerals from distant hills, every animal that drinks at its edge, all of it, leaves something behind, a trace, a chemical signature, a moment of presence absorbed into the vast body of water that watches, that holds, that remembers. And so lakes become archives of climate, of life, of time. Sediment settles slowly on their floors, layer after layer, year after year, preserving pollen, ash, bones, fragments of civilization, echoes of extinction, the bloom and fade of algae, the droughts and floods of centuries long past. And by drilling cores from these layers, scientists can read the history of rainfall and dryness, of human settlement and migration, of volcanic eruption and planetary change, all written, not in ink but in mud, held quietly beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered. Some lakes are ancient, millions of years old, like Lake Baikal in Siberia, the deepest lake in the world, a rift lake formed by tectonic pulling, so deep and old it holds more fresh water than any other lake on Earth, more species of fish found nowhere else, more mystery, more silence, more depth than any one mind can grasp. Others are young, crater lakes, glacial lakes, reservoirs made by human hands, and though they may be smaller, newer, they still reflect, they still hold sky, they still feed birds and fish, and reeds and cattails and frogs. They still become part of the great chain that moves water from cloud to stream to ocean, and back again. And sometimes, lakes vanish, through evaporation, through tectonic uplift, through changing rainfall and human intervention. They shrink, they dry, they become salt flats or ghostly depressions, where once there were boats and waves and voices, and in those places, the memory of water lingers in the cracked mud, in the broken shells, in the footprints left behind, a reminder that water is never truly still, that even in its most peaceful forms, it is always moving toward change. We build our homes near lakes, we go to them in summer, to feel the quiet, to swim in their coolness, to watch the reflection of the moon ripple and shimmer on the surface, and even if we do not say it, we sense that lakes hold something sacred, something in their depth, that is more than water, more than ecology, more than landscape. It is the stillness of presence. It is the way the world can be held without being changed. It is the way reflection teaches us to look again, not just at the sky but at ourselves, because lakes are not only part of the hydrological cycle, not only a step between rainfall and river, not only a home for birds or a source of irrigation, they are the earth's way of pausing, of looking inward, of remembering. And in the quiet mirror of the lake, the water rests, for a moment before rising again, as mist, before becoming cloud, before falling again in rain, before rushing down the mountainside once more. It is a cycle without end, and in that cycle the lake waits, it reflects, it remembers, it becomes the breath held between two thoughts, the silence between two songs, the place where motion gathers its strength, before continuing. And when you stand beside one, when you watch its surface ripple with wind, or freeze in winter, or shine beneath a setting sun, you are standing not just beside water, but beside a moment in the life of the planet, a moment held, a mirror still, a journey paused, before it begins again. Chapter 12. The Deep Breath. How Water Moves Beneath the Ground. Beneath your feet, far below the soil, and the roots, beyond the reach of sunlight, and the sound of birdsong, hidden from view, yet quietly essential to all life above. Water continues its journey, not in waves or rain or rivers, but in silence, flowing through the hidden veins of the earth, threading its way through layers of rock, sand and clay, not in open rush, but in patient seepage, in a gravity-guided drift, so slow it can take centuries to cross even a few kilometers. And yet in that unseen motion lies one of the most vital forces on the planet, groundwater, the deep breath of the earth itself. This water does not announce itself. It does not shimmer on the surface or fall from the sky. Instead, it sinks slowly downward, drop by drop, after every rainfall, after every snowmelt, filtering through the pores of soil, through cracks in stone, through the spaces between grains of sand, pulled ever deeper by the gentle tug of gravity, until it gathers in vast reservoirs beneath the surface, aquifers, ancient and vast, stretching for hundreds of miles in every direction, holding more water than all the rivers and lakes on Earth combined. A subterranean ocean, sealed not by coastlines, but by layers of stone. And yet, despite their scale, aquifers are not oceans of open water, but rather water-soaked rock, porous sandstone, fractured limestone, volcanic basalt, where water clings to the spaces in between, saturating the material rather than replacing it, flowing not as a stream, but as a slow migration shaped by the tiniest pathways, by the minute tilts of the land, by the mineral content of the stone around it, each drop moving in a way that is both random and inevitable, both aimless and perfectly guided by the physics of pressure and time. This hidden water is not separate from the world above. It feeds the springs that burst forth in mountain meadows, the wells that sustain cities and farms, the oases that appear in deserts, like miracles from stone, and in return, it is fed by the sky itself, by the rainfall that seeps downward, by the melting snow that disappears into cracks, by the rivers that leak from their beds in slow surrender to the ground beneath them, creating a loop of exchange that binds surface and depth, sky and soil, light and dark, into one unbroken cycle of renewal. In some places, this journey is short. Water falls, seeps, and emerges again in days or weeks, but in others it is timeless, water descending into ancient aquifers, where it will remain locked for thousands of years, untouched by the atmosphere, untouched by light, becoming what scientists call fossil water, a relic of wetter ages, a library of climatic history stored not in books or cores, but in droplets scattered through deep stone, waiting perhaps forever, or until some human hand drills downward and draws it to the surface once again. And within that journey, water is transformed. As it passes through soil, it is filtered, cleansed of impurities, its path slowed and softened by the living world above. And as it moves through deeper strata, it absorbs minerals from the rocks around it, calcium, magnesium, iron, each one changing the character of the water, giving it taste, hardness, clarity, sometimes even color. And when it emerges again, in a spring or well, that water is not the same as it was when it fell from the sky, but richer, heavier, wiser, marked by every layer it passed through, every stone it touched, every chamber it rested in. It is this process that makes groundwater not just useful but sacred, for it is water that has been cared for by the earth, cradled in darkness, cooled and stored and delivered with patience, with reverence, a reminder that not all gifts come quickly, that some arrive only after long silence and deep waiting, and yet for all its patience, groundwater is not infinite. When we take more than the earth can replenish, when we drill too deep, pump too far, fail to allow rain to return and recharge the aquifers, the land itself begins to change. The ground may sink, collapsing into the spaces once filled by water, wells may dry, springs may vanish, and the balance between above and below may begin to unravel. The tragedy is that we rarely see it happening, because groundwater disappears in silence. It cannot be watched like a shrinking river or a vanishing lake. It is lost drop by drop, without fanfare, until one day, what was once abundant becomes unreachable, and the deep breath of the earth turns shallow. But when we protect it, when we understand how water moves beneath it, when we let rain soak into the soil rather than running away on paved streets, when we preserve wetlands and floodplains that act as natural recharge zones, when we treat every well not as a bottomless promise, but as a connection to a delicate system, far older than our cities or fields, we restore a kind of partnership, a quiet pact between humanity and the hidden waters that have sustained us since before we knew they existed. And the life that depends on this water is not only human. Roots reach downward, toward moisture no eye can see. Trees tap aquifers with deep tendrils that hold firm, even in drought. Caves form around slow drips of mineral-laden water that carve stone into cathedrals over millennia, building stalactites and stalagmites from nothing more than patience and evaporation. Even desert creatures, kangaroo rats, thorn trees, deep-rooted shrubs, live on the edge of this hidden water, drawing sustenance from the narrow line where groundwater comes close enough to nourish, without ever surface. It is this intersection between seen and unseen, between the wet and the dry, between motion and stillness, that gives groundwater its mystery, its power, its poetry. Because beneath the noise of rain, beneath the rush of rivers, beneath the rising clouds, the earth is always drinking slowly, deeply, rhythmically, and that drink sustains not just life but memory, shape. So the next time you walk across grass or stone, across pavement or field, remember what lies beneath, not just bedrock, not just roots, but water, old and moving, quiet and faithful, making its way through the underworld of soil and stone, never asking to be noticed, only to be honored, because the deepest water is the most silent, and in that silence the earth breathes. Chapter 13. The Pulse of the Tides. How the moon moves the sea. Long before clocks marked the hours, or calendars measured the seasons, long before human beings knew how to name the days, or predict the rise and fall of water along the shore, there was already a rhythm pulsing through the oceans, a silent, ancient heartbeat, drawn not from the earth itself, but from the sky. For every wave that laps at the sand, every harbor that fills and empties, every shoreline that breathes in and out with remarkable consistency, is responding to the invisible pull of the moon, that pale, distant body hanging in the heavens, quietly moving trillions of tons of seawater, without ever making a sound. The tides, though as gentle as a whisper to those standing at the shore, are among the most powerful forces on Earth, shifting the position of entire coastlines twice each day, sculpting deltas, stirring nutrients through vast coastal shallows, shaping the behavior of animals, carving paths for fish to follow, and channels for boats to drift. And yet their cause lies not in the earth, not in the wind, not even in the ocean itself, but in the gravitational pull between this planet and its solitary satellite, a bond as old as the oceans themselves, a constant conversation between mass and motion, between earth and moon. Gravity does not announce itself. It does not push or strike or roar. It pulls, endlessly, reaching across the void of space with hands made of mathematics and force, drawing the ocean's surface toward the moon, just enough to create a bulge, a swelling of water, that follows the moon as it orbits. And this bulge is what we call the high tide, not a wall of water, but a subtle rising, a gentle lift, a soft swelling of the sea in response to that ever-present lunar pull. And because the earth rotates beneath this bulge, and because water cannot stay still when the planet beneath it is turning, most coastal places experience 2 high tides and 2 low tides every day, a rhythm not chosen by wind or weather, but dictated by the geometry of orbits, by the spin of the earth, by the delicate interplay between mass, motion, and time. The sun, too, plays a part. Though it is much farther away, its gravitational pull also tugs at the oceans, and when the sun and the moon align during new moons and full moons, their combined gravity intensifies the tides, creating what are known as spring tides, where high tides are higher and low tides lower, and the pulse of the sea becomes more dramatic, more pronounced, a deeper breath in the lungs of the earth. And when the sun and moon are at right angles to each other, during the first and third quarters of the moon's cycle, their gravitational pulls partially cancel out, leading to neap tides, where the range between high and low is gentler, more restrained, as if the sea is whispering instead of singing. But whether spring or neap, tidal flows never stop, even beneath the ice sheets of the Arctic, even in the narrowest fjord, even in places where no human stands to watch. The sea continues its slow dance with the moon. The tide rises and falls, the currents shift forward and back, and every molecule of water feels the call of that distant companion above, responding without question, without resistance, as it has done for billions of years. And in that movement, life responds. Along the coasts, tidal flats bloom with richness, exposed at low tide for birds to feed upon, flooded again at high tide for fish to return, creating a world that is neither land nor sea, but both, a world of in-betweens where barnacles cling, mussels filter, crabs scuttle, and mangroves root themselves in soil that breathes in salt water twice a day. Some creatures live by the tide's clock rather than the sun's, spawning only at certain phases, feeding only when the water rises or retreats, burying themselves in sand until the next cycle calls them forth. And in these rhythms, we see not chaos, not randomness, but deep order, a biological harmony tuned to the pulse of the sea, which is itself tuned to the pull of the moon, which is itself a relic of Earth's own ancient violence, torn from the planet by a long-ago collision, now held in perfect orbit by the same force that lifts the ocean's edge. Tides do more than shape coastlines. They generate energy, especially where the sea funnels into narrow inlets or around islands, where tidal currents become strong enough to be harnessed by turbines, capturing the kinetic energy of water driven by gravity, transforming it into electricity, into light, into heat. A reminder that the moon does not only influence poetry and dreams, but power and systems, and infrastructure, and even beyond Earth. Tides shape the universe. The same gravitational pull that moves our seas also acts on other moons and planets, flexing their crust, heating their interiors through friction, perhaps creating conditions where oceans exist beneath surfaces of ice, where warmth may support life, such as on Europa, Jupiter's moon, where tidal forces from the gas giant keep its subsurface ocean liquid, where something like life may be waiting, rocking gently in a sea that never sees sunlight but always feels the pull. But here on Earth, the tides are not hidden, they are seen in the strand line left behind each day, in the puddles left in rocks that hold miniature ecosystems, in the long walk required at low tide to reach a distant wave, in the return of the sea to reclaim what it momentarily gave up. And in this daily repetition, there is something comforting, something ancient, something profoundly grounding, because the tide does not fail, does not forget, does not falter. It simply follows the moon, and the moon, though silent, though distant, though cold, has shaped more than romance or myth. It has shaped the water, and the water has shaped us. So when you hear the hush of waves at night, when you walk along the shore and watch the sea inch upward or downward, when you see the line where wet sand turns dry and back again, you are watching, not just water, not just motion, but the long, slow heartbeat of a planet in love with its moon, a rhythm that began long before you and will continue long after, a pull that speaks not in words but in motion, because water listens, and the moon calls, and the tides are the answer, flowing in and out like breath, ancient, constant and alive. Chapter 14. Rivers in the Sky. The journey of evaporation and the return to rain. If you were to follow a single drop of water, not in its crash against the rocks or its slow glide through soil, but in its rising, in that moment when it lifts invisibly from the surface of a lake, from the skin of a leaf, from the breath of a warm sea, you would find yourself tracing a path, not downward into depth, but upward into openness, into the waiting arms of the sky, where the drop, no longer bound by gravity's pull, begins a new chapter of its endless journey, carried not by rivers of stone, but by currents of air, by invisible highways of vapor that drift between continents, mountains and oceans, delivering the promise of rain long before the first cloud is ever born. Evaporation, though unseen, is one of the most profound miracles of water. The ability to change form without changing substance, to leave behind all impurities, all sediment, all salt, and become pure again, a vapor drawn upward by the heat of the sun, released from ocean, lake, wet soil or skin, turning into air, not with sound or spectacle, but with stillness, with transformation, with the soft vanishing of liquid into gas. Every day, trillions of tons of water rise from the surface of the earth, not in storms or floods, or tides, but in silence, and as they ascend, they do not scatter randomly, but join together in great rivers of vapor that flow above us, shaped by wind, by geography, by pressure and temperature, moving from places of abundance to places of need, connecting rainforest to desert, sea to mountain, jungle to feel, binding the planet in a web of invisible water, drawn not on maps, but traced in humidity, in cloud formation, in the return of rain. These atmospheric rivers, though unseen, are immense in scale, stretching thousands of kilometers, each one capable of carrying more water than the Amazon or the Nile, each one drifting above us, waiting only for the right condition to release its cargo, to fall once more in drops that kiss the ground, that nourish root and soil, that fill the reservoirs of life again. And the trigger for that release is always change, a drop in temperature, the rise of terrain, the meeting of air masses from different regions. And when that moment comes, condensation begins. Vapor becomes droplets, droplets gather into clouds, clouds swell into systems, and then, as gravity reclaims what heat once lifted, rain begins to fall. But this return is not uniform. Some of the water falls gently, a soft drizzle that feeds moss and fern, and the smallest roots hidden beneath the forest floor, while some crashes violently in downpour and flood, overwhelming soil, breaking banks, reminding us that even something as gentle as rain can, in abundance, wield force. Some rain is captured immediately, by leaves, by roofs, by thirsty ground, while some collects in puddles, in streams, in low-lying plains, beginning its journey once more toward lake or sea, completing a circle that never truly ends. And some of the water never reaches the ground at all, evaporating again mid-fall, lifted once more into vapor, returned to the sky before it ever touches land. A kind of ghost rain, a promise only half kept, lingering in the air like breath held too long. But no matter the form, mist, storm, shower or torrent, rain is never random. It is the answer to evaporation. It is the return, the homecoming, the falling back to earth of water that once rose upward in silence, bringing with it the memory of ocean, of heat, of time suspended between states. And in this rise and return, the planet breathes. Evaporation is the inhale, the lifting of water into the lungs of the sky. Rain is the exhale, the soft release of that breath onto land. This cycle is not just movement, it is balance. It cools the surface of the earth, redistributes, carries energy from the tropics toward the poles, shapes climate patterns, feeds glaciers, fills rivers, creates the conditions necessary for life to thrive not just in one place, but everywhere. Without evaporation, the sea would become stagnant. Without rain, the land would turn to dust. Without both, there would be no clouds, no shade, no forest, no wheat field, no wet footprint on a path at dawn. And this balance extends even to the smallest scales. A tree, drawing water from the soil through its roots, releases vapor from its leaves in a process called transpiration, a kind of biological evaporation that sends moisture into the air. And when multiplied by millions of trees, entire forests can create their own weather systems, can summon their own rain, can sustain their own cycle, independent of the sea, independent of distance, creating self-contained loops of water that nourish themselves and everything nearby. The Amazon does this. The Congo Basin does this. Even small patches of wetland do this. Life, once it mastered water, learned not only to survive within it, but to participate in its cycle, to give back what it takes, to lift and fall in harmony with the world around it. And when humans began to settle, to farm, to build cities, they too became part of this rhythm, shaping water's path with canals, with dams, with wells and aqueducts, yet still dependent on the sky, still looking upward when the drought lingered too long, still listening for the sound of the first raindrop on dry leaves. Because in every culture, in every age, rain has been more than weather. It has been a blessing, a prayer answered, a moment of reunion between sky and soil. Even now in the most advanced cities, with water piped and pumped and treated, the need for rain remains, to replenish aquifers, to wash clean the streets, to cool the air, to remind us that no matter how far we rise in buildings or ambition, we are still creatures of earth, still dependent on what the clouds decide to return. So the next time you feel humidity in the air, know that you are walking through future rain, through water that rose from the ocean, or from the forest, or from the sweat of 100 leaves. now drifting above you in weight. And when the rain begins, do not rush for shelter. Pause, listen, let it touch your skin, because that rain is the completion of a cycle older than language, a journey that began as a shimmer on the sea, as a breath rising from the canopy, as vapor lifting from a still pond, and in that drop upon your cheek is the whole sky coming home. Water remembers its way back, it always returns. Chapter 15. The River's Memory. How water remembers the shape of the land. As water flows, it does more than move. It remembers, not in the way we think of memory, not in thoughts or images or stories, but in patterns, in rhythm, in the way it follows curves it carved long ago, in the way it slows where valleys widen and quickens where stones crowd close, in the way it traces the same turns, again and again, as if pulled not only by gravity but by habit, by the land's own long-held whisper. A river does not choose its path, but once that path is made, it remembers, and through that memory, it shapes the world again. When a raindrop falls high in the mountains, its journey is not random, for the earth beneath it holds contours and creases, old scars from glaciers long gone, fault lines that shift and settle, ancient roots of ice and melt and upheaval, and the drop, now joined by countless others, begins to follow the softest pull, the lowest line, the place where the rock dips downward, and from that first trickle, a stream is born. That stream, narrow and tentative, begins to pick up speed. It gathers other streams, swells with snowmelt, deepens with seasonal rains, and eventually becomes a river, a body not just of water, but of direction, a line of motion, so persistent, it becomes geography itself. Mountains shape the river, but the river in turn shapes the mountain, cutting deep gorges, carrying away gravel and stone, making smooth the edges of what was once sharp and unforgiving, and with every flood, with every season, with every the river deepens its memory, laying down sediment in one bend, eroding away soil in another, slowly widening the valley that cradles it, smoothing the rocks that line its banks, cutting deeper into clay, or carving wider across plains, until its course becomes not just a channel of water, but a pattern, etched into the very face of the earth. Even when the river seems to change, when it jumps its banks, when it carves a new path during a flood, it is still responding to the shape of what came before, guided by old floodplains, old layers of soil, old lines where water once ran, now dry, now waiting. Because water, though it appears spontaneous, is never without reason. It flows where it is allowed, where it is invited, where gravity and space permit it, and once it finds that path, it remembers it, reinforces it, travels it again and again, until even the land begins to expect it. And this memory is not just physical, it is ecological. Rivers shape the ecosystems through which they run, depositing nutrients on their banks, feeding wetlands with seasonal floods, creating oxbow lakes where old meanders were cut off, building sandbars and islands that shift with every season, every storm. The plants that grow near rivers are adapted not just to the presence of water, but to its behavior, to its rise and fall, its silt and flow, its calm and its fury. Animals too learn the river's rhythm. Fish swim upstream to spawn at the same time each year, trusting the current to guide them home. Birds nest in trees whose roots drink from the bank. Beavers build dams not to stop the river, but to work with it, to slow it just enough to create deep ponds and wet meadows, new homes for insects, frogs, deer and willow. Even the smallest creatures, insects that live just beneath the surface, invisible to the eye, are shaped by the speed of the flow, the oxygen in the water, the particles suspended in motion, and in return, the river is shaped by all it touches. Leaves fall into its current and are carried far downstream. Tree roots reach for it, hold the soil in place, or, if eroded, collapse into its path, changing the way it moves. Landslides block it temporarily, but the river finds its way around. Drought narrows it, heat warms it, melting glaciers feed it again. Through every change the river adapts, but always in memory, always in response to what came before, always shaped by yesterday even as it flows toward tomorrow. Even the sound of a river carries memory, the way it echoes in a narrow canyon, the way it hushes through reeds, the way it roars against stone, or falls in silver sheets over a ledge, each tone shaped by the landscape, each tone a signature of place, a language spoken in gurgles and rushes and silence, a story that repeats with variation, again and again. In flood the river becomes forgetful, it spills over, reclaims old channels, spreads into fields that have not seen water in years, deposits silt, pulls down fences, shifts boundaries, erases roads, redraws the shape of the land in a single night. And yet when the flood recedes, it settles back into a familiar bed, a groove worn deep by centuries of repetition, a return to what it knew, to what it was, to what it will be again. Human beings have always tried to write over the memory of rivers, to straighten them, to contain them in concrete, to channel them into predictability, but water resists the unnatural. It pushes at walls, it finds cracks, it works patiently beneath the surface, and over time, it remembers its old path, returns to it, reclaims it, reminding us that memory lives in nature, not just in minds but in movement, in erosion, in direction. Cities rise beside rivers because they promise water, transport, life, but they also bring risk, because memory cannot be erased, only delayed. A river that once flooded will flood again, perhaps not this year, perhaps not this century, but someday, and when it does, it will follow its old lines, its old logic, its ancient pull, as if it never forgot. Even dried rivers remember, even when a bed lies cracked and dusty. The land still holds the shape of the flow, and the first rain awakens it like a dream. Recalled, the path fills again, the water returns, and the river, though absent for years, flows as if it never left, as if its memory had been sleeping just beneath the crust of the earth, waiting for the signal to return. And so the river teaches us. It teaches us that water is not only movement, not only change, but remembrance, a liquid history that flows through valleys and lives, carrying minerals and memories, carrying the shape of mountains and the names of ancestors, carrying seeds and songs and the slow breath of the earth itself. To stand by a river is to witness the past in motion. To drink from it is to share in the memory of stone and rain. To follow it is to learn how the world was shaped, not by force, but by repetition, by flow, by remembering, because the river never forgets where it carries the land's memory forward, and in its motion, it teaches us how to listen. Chapter 16. The Thirst of the Desert. Water where there is almost none. There are places on earth where rain falls so rarely it becomes legend, where the rivers do not run but vanish into the sand, where the sun rules without challenge, and where water is not a given, but a ghost, a presence so absent, it defines everything that lives, moves, and survives. And yet even here, in the vast quiet of deserts, where dunes shift under blazing skies and the wind carries nothing but dust, water still exists, still matters, still moves, not in the open, not in abundance, but in whispers beneath the surface, in fog that kisses rock at dawn, in roots that reach deeper than seems possible, in creatures that have learned not only to endure dryness, but to be shaped by it. Deserts are not merely empty, they are precise, tuned ecosystems, sculpted around the absence of water, where every plant and animal, every pattern of wind, every grain of soil, exists in response to the scarcity of rain, the intensity of evaporation, and the vast, open hunger of the land for moisture it almost never receives. And because of that scarcity, because of that long absence, water becomes sacred, not just a resource but a miracle, a presence that rewrites the landscape the moment it arrives. When rain does fall in the desert, sometimes only once every few years, sometimes as a single storm that floods the land in minutes, the earth remembers how to bloom. Seeds buried for decades awaken, cracking open their coats and sending green shoots toward the sun. Flowers blossom in wild color across dunes that moments before seemed lifeless. Insects emerge in swarms, Birds migrate to feed, lizards dance between puddles. It is a moment of ecstasy, of sudden abundance, of the land exhaling after years of holding its breath. And then, just as quickly, the heat returns, the sun dries the soil, the bloom fades, and the desert returns to stillness, but never to forgetfulness. Because even in drought, the memory of water lingers. There are rivers in deserts, dry, sun-bleached, seemingly forgotten, called wadis, or arroyo, or ephemeral streams, their beds etched deeply into the earth, their rocks polished smooth by floods long past. Though they carry no flow for most of the year, they are not dead. Beneath the surface, just below the cracked skin of sand and clay, moisture hides, pulled downward by gravity, trapped in layers of porous rock, waiting for roots to find it, for capillary action to lift it upward, or for some wandering creature to dig and drip. Plants that survive in deserts have not just adapted, they have transformed. Their roots stretch laterally for dozens of meters to catch even the lightest rainfall, or plunge vertically for tens of meters to reach ancient aquifers buried deep below. Their leaves are small, waxy, spined, or gone altogether, replaced by stems that store water, that seal in moisture, that breathe only at night to avoid the thirst of daylight. The cactus holds its water not in softness but in armor. The acacia tree balances life between drought and flood, growing wide canopies that shade the ground, preserving the moisture beneath its feet. Some desert mosses can lose almost all their internal water, and still survive desiccated for years, rehydrating within minutes of contact with dew or rain, springing back to life as though no time had passed. And in the animal world, the miracles of adaptation deepen. The kangaroo rat survives without ever drinking liquid water, deriving all it needs from the seeds it eats, exhaling moistureless breath through complex nasal passages that trap every molecule of vapor before it can be lost to the air. Camels, with their storied humps, do not store water there, but fat, which can be converted into energy and water during long journeys through heat and sand. Beetles in the Namib Desert climb dunes before dawn and raise their bodies into the air to catch fog drifting in from the Atlantic, condensing droplets on their backs that roll down into their mouths. And so even here, especially here, water is not just something that falls, it is something pursued, remembered, captured, honored. It is a shape the land takes, a whisper life listens for, a presence felt even in absence. There are deserts made of salt, where lakes once stood and then vanished, leaving behind dry basins crusted white and cracked by the sun. And even in these places the earth waits, for rain, for a shift in wind, for a rise in groundwater that might for a moment flood the plain and paint the sky with the reflection of stars in standing water. There are deserts made of stone, carved by wind, colored by iron, layered with history, where the flash flood is feared, not for its volume, but for its violence, where dry canyons can fill within minutes, walls of water and debris roaring through corridors that have known only silence, reshaping the land with each rare storm, then vanishing again into silence, into memory. Even the air in the desert holds stories of water. In the early morning, fog rolls in like a grey breath, hugging the surface, condensing on stones, dripping from thorn bushes, vanishing by mid-morning, a water delivery measured in drops, but life-changing for the things that drink from. And though the human eye sees the desert as barren, endless, dead, it is in truth a place of precision and timing, where water is not absent, but rare, where it moves not in rivers but in pulses, not in streams but in signals, a rainfall here, a bloom there, the scent of petrichor rising from sand as the first drop hits sun-baked soil, releasing a fragrance older than memory, a chemical celebration of contact between sky and earth. To survive here is to remember how to wait, to listen, to make use of every shadow, every trickle, every hidden pool. Indigenous peoples who have lived in deserts for generations have learned to read the land as one reads a story, to track moisture through plants, to find water in places where none appears to exist, to share it, to honor it, to understand that the line between life and death in such a place is often measured, not in liters but in teaspoons. And when night comes, as it always does, the heat drops, The wind slows and the stars blaze like a canopy of ice above the warm stone. Even here, in this place that rarely weeps, the dew gathers quietly on the surface of leaves and rocks, pooling in hollows, sustaining creatures that move by moonlight. Because water is never fully gone, it is only hiding, and those who know the desert know that beneath every stone, in every breath of wind, in every line of salt on dry earth, water waits not always to return in torrents or floods, but to remind the land that life is still possible, that survival is still sacred, that even in the driest place, hope does not disappear, it only deepens. The desert is not a place without water, it is a place where water is remembered more deeply than anywhere else on earth. Chapter 17: Snowfall and Silence. The soft architecture of frozen water, high in the mountains, where the air thins and the sky sharpens into deeper blue, where trees give way to stone and silence begins to settle like a second skin. Water takes on yet another form, one not of thunder or flow or weight, but of softness, of quiet descent, of delicate structure born from cold and stillness. For here in these frozen heights, water becomes snow, and in doing so it remakes the landscape not with force, but with patience, not with volume, but with shape, creating a world that sleeps beneath white and whispers. Snow is not simply frozen rain. It begins its life not as droplets falling from grey skies, but as vapor high above, as water that rises unseen and condenses around particles of dust or pollen, forming crystals in the coldest corners of clouds, where the temperature is so low and the humidity so precise that the water vapor skips the liquid stage entirely, turning straight into ice, building itself outward into intricate geometries that never repeat, six-armed, feathered, plated, branched, each flake a map of the conditions in which it formed, a record of temperature, turbulence, time, a frozen fingerprint never made before and never to be made again. These flakes fall not with urgency but with grace, drifting downward on currents of wind, spinning and catching the light, joining one another in their descent until they settle upon the ground, layer upon layer, silence upon silence, a transformation that slowly erases the color of the earth beneath, softening edges, muffling sound, making even the fiercest landscape appear gentle for a time. Snow transforms the world in more ways than one. It insulates, blanketing the soil beneath in a layer of air-trapping crystals that prevent deeper freezes, allowing seeds, roots and even insects to survive the coldest months, a paradox of cold preserving life. It reflects sunlight with high albedo, bouncing solar energy back into space, and cooling not just the region where it falls, but influencing the climate of entire hemispheres, regulating the planet's balance with every bright field and snow-covered peak. And it holds water, quietly and patiently, storing it for seasons yet to come, in drifts, in glaciers, in mountaintop cornices, where it compacts under its own weight, slowly transforming into fern, into ice, into the slow-moving rivers we call glaciers, which in turn feed streams, rivers and aquifers in spring and summer, ensuring that water flows long after the skies have cleared. In this way, snow is not simply weather, it is memory, it is promise, it is stored potential, hidden moisture, a delayed delivery of the sky's gift to the earth. And for those who live with it, snow is a language, one spoken in the shape of flakes, the feel beneath boots, the layers of crust or powder, the scent of it on the wind, the way it falls fast or slow, dry or wet, thick or thin, each variation telling a story of what has come and what will follow, each variation offering clues to the farmer, the mountaineer, the wolf, the tree. In forests, snow gathers on branches in hushed sculpture, bending pines and spruces under its weight, until they creak like timbers of a great ship. In open fields it sculpts ripples and waves, like frozen surf frozen mid-motion by wind. In cities it transforms the noise of traffic and footfall into a soft quiet, covering the hard edges of concrete in velvet frost. But beyond beauty, snow is power. When it gathers too quickly, it can bury entire landscapes, closing roads, covering roofs, silencing the hum of human life beneath a weight too great to move. When it melts too suddenly, it floods rivers, spills into valleys, sweeps away bridges, and soil and all memory of what was once firm ground. When it falls as blizzard driven by wind, it blinds, it disorients, it erases the world beyond an arm's reach. And yet, at its most still, when it falls in soft windless flakes, beneath a full moon, snow becomes something else entirely. It becomes time slowed, it becomes breath made visible, it becomes the hush before transformation. For many animals, snow is not just cold but covered. Hares and foxes change their coats to match it, vanishing into white. Bears dig deep beneath it, dreaming through winter in dens packed warm. Owls drift silently above it, hunting by ear, listening for the faintest stir beneath the crust. Mice and voles travel in tunnels carved beneath the snow's surface, safe from predators and frost, navigating a subnivean world where warmth lingers just enough to sustain life. And for humans, snow holds its own magic. It signals retreat, pause, stillness, the drawing inward of energy and attention. It invites us to step more carefully, to listen more closely, to notice the world in finer detail, the shape of a flake on a glove, the hush of wind through icy branches, the way even our own footsteps become the only sound in a field of unbroken white. In cultures across time, snow has become a metaphor for purity, for silence, for renewal, for death and rebirth, because it covers and preserves, because it makes all things equal for a time, because it reminds us that beneath the surface, even in the coldest season, life waits patiently for warmth to return. And when the thaw comes, as it always does, the snow does not vanish, it releases, it flows again, drop by drop into the soil, into the roots, into the streams that feed rivers, into the aquifers that will rise in spring, into the body of the earth, which drinks what the sky once gave, transformed. In this way, snow is not the end of a cycle, but a turn, a pause between chapters, a breath drawn in. And when you step into a snow-covered world, you are walking not on death, but on memory, on the sky held still, on the water waiting to return, on a silence that sings if you listen long enough. Because snow is not absence, it is waiting. And in its fall, in its presence, in its hush, it teaches us to be still too, to watch, to remember, to know that beneath the cold, beneath the white, beneath the long night, water sleeps, and when it wakes, the world will bloom again. Chapter 18. Oceans Within. The water inside our bodies, and the life it sustains. Though we often speak of rivers and seas as separate from ourselves, though we marvel at waterfalls and storms as things that happen out there, in the landscape, in the distance, beyond skin and bone, the truth is that the greatest body of water you will ever carry is not around you but within you, pulsing through veins, suspended in cells, flowing silently beneath your breath. For every human being, every creature that walks, flies, swims, or grows, is built not only of matter and memory, but of water, and not a little, but overwhelmingly, fundamentally, unavoidably so. From the moment you were formed, in the dark, warm waters of your mother's womb, you were cradled in liquid, buoyed by fluid, shaped in the embrace of a tiny ocean, a perfect saline world that echoed the composition of Earth's earliest seas. And from those embryonic beginnings, the blueprint was written. Water would be your medium, your mirror, your constant companion. The body of an adult human is composed of roughly 60% water, though this number varies, higher in infants, lower in the elderly, shifting with muscle mass and hydration, a fluid truth beneath a solid shell, and that water is not stagnant, not pooled like a lake, but alive with motion, with direction, with purpose, coursing through blood vessels, bathing every organ, lubricating every joint, delivering nutrients and hormones, flushing toxins, regulating temperature, and forming the very environment in which the body's cells exist and interact. Your blood, which carries oxygen from your lungs to every corner of your body, is more than 90% water by volume, and every beat of your heart, each surge of pressure through arteries and veins, is powered by and carried upon that liquid highway. Your brain, that seat of thought, memory, emotion, and identity, floats within cerebrospinal fluid, protected from shock, from pressure, from imbalance, cradled in a cushion of water that is replenished and recirculated constantly, connecting neural activity to physical safety, intelligence to chemistry, spirit to substance. Your muscles, strong and coordinated though they may seem, are hydrated machines, each contraction a chemical event made possible by ions in solution, each fiber reliant on water to maintain tone, resilience, and repair. Even your bones, seemingly dry, rigid, permanent, contain water, stored deep within their matrix, influencing density, health, and regeneration, for even the hardest parts of you are not immune to the call of moisture, and on the surface, your skin drinks and releases water with each breath of wind, each change in temperature, each movement through air, acting as both barrier and conduit, protecting your inner oceans from evaporation, while also expressing them outward in sweat, in warmth, in the fine mist that rises from you unnoticed. Water, in the human body, is not just presence, it is process. It is the medium through which biochemical reactions occur, the space in which molecules meet and transform, the field upon which enzymes act, the stage on which metabolism plays its never-ending drama of creation and decay. Without water, no digestion. Without water, no cell communication. Without water, no heat regulation, no toxin removal, no immune defense. You are, in essence, a walking river system, a contained ocean in motion, a cascade of internal tides that shift from moment to moment, influenced by salt and sugar, by stress and rest, by food and thirst, and sleep and illness. And that water is not static, it moves constantly through you, entering through food and drink, leaving through breath, urine, sweat, and skin, recycled and replaced, in a dance so quiet you rarely notice until imbalance arrives. Dehydration, fatigue, confusion, collapse, the body's quiet scream for its forgotten element. And this connection goes beyond physiology. The water inside you remembers. It remembers the minerals of the food you eat, the flavor of the air you breathe, the chemistry of the thoughts you think. For even emotion has a physical echo, and studies have shown that stress, fear, and joy affect the balance of fluids, the constriction of vessels, the way water moves inside the body, and in this way the inner ocean reflects the mind, just as the sea reflects the moon. And it's not only human. Every living thing that breathes or grows carries water within. Trees that draw it up through capillary action, in silent defiance of gravity, holding entire rivers in their trunks and branches. Insects, whose small bodies shimmer with hydration. Amphibians whose skin drinks directly from rain and pond. Elephants, who carry hundreds of liters within and still thirst in the heat. Seeds that contain just enough moisture to wait for a sign, the right warmth, the right darkness, the right drop, to unfold into life. Even in the driest environments, in desert beetles and microscopic tardigrades, life persists, because water is held close, protected, hoarded, revered. For no molecule is more vital, more universal, more intimate. You do not merely drink water, you are water in motion. Your tears when they fall are not just signs of sorrow or joy, they are part of the inner ocean spilling out, a truth made liquid, a release of salt and self. Your breath, as it fogs in cold air, is not just carbon exhaled, it is vapor leaving you, returning to the sky, a tiny offering to the atmosphere. When you touch another, warmth transfers, yes, but so too does moisture, the damp current of connection, the shared humidity of closeness. And when you die, that water will not vanish, it will return, to soil, to air, to plant, to stream, recycled, reclaimed, renamed, but never lost, because the water that formed you was borrowed, not owned. And the earth always calls its waters back. In every ancient text, in every culture, water is the source, the origin of the world, the first element before light or land, the mother of all life. And perhaps it is because even the ancients knew, without science, that to live was to be made of water, to carry the ocean within, to be shaped by it in ways we may never fully see. So the next time you drink, drink with awareness. The next time you sweat, breathe, cry, remember what you carry. You are not a creature moving through a watery world. You are a watery world, dreaming of the sea. And in your blood, in your breath, in the shimmer behind your eyes, the memory of rivers, of rain, of oceans past, still flow. Chapter 19. When water heals. The medicine hidden in motion and stillness. There is a reason we go to the water when we are tired, when we are overwhelmed, when we ache in ways that medicine cannot touch. A reason we walk along the shore in silence, or run hot baths to soak away the day, or float in pools with eyes closed and breath slowed, letting the body dissolve into the rhythm of gentle waves or warm stillness. Water, whether falling or flowing, still or storming, holds a power that transcends explanation. It comforts, it restores, it calms, and while the science may explain circulation and hydrostatic pressure, while chemistry may account for minerals and temperature, the truth lies deeper. Water heals not only the body but the spirit, and it does so in ways that are older than language, older than memory, older even than humankind itself. Long before hospitals and laboratories, humans turned to springs and rivers for healing, gathering at sacred wells, washing wounds in cold streams, bathing in thermal waters rising from the depths of the earth. Civilizations rose around places where water emerged clean and pure, places believed to be blessed, not merely for their abundance, but for the effect they had on those who touched them. The Romans built entire cultures around the bathhouse, where warm water was not only luxury but medicine, easing joints, cleansing skin, loosening tension held tight by war or work. The Japanese perfected the art of the onsen, the geothermal spring, where each mineral-infused bath was known for healing a different ailment. Indigenous peoples across the world, from the Arctic tundra to the African savanna, carried with them the knowledge that the right water in the right moment could soothe fever, cleanse the spirit, restore balance. And modern science, despite all its precision, agreed. Warm water relaxes blood vessels, improving circulation. Floating in water supports the body evenly, removing pressure from joints and muscles, allowing healing in ways gravity resists on land. Cool water reduces inflammation, numbs pain, calms overworked nerves. Salt water cleans wounds naturally, balancing pH, drawing out impurities. But beyond these effects is something subtler. The way water slows us down, invites presence, demands nothing, offers space. Because healing is not always a matter of fixing, sometimes it is a matter of softening, of returning, of remembering what it feels like not to be rushed, not to be burdened, not to be hard. When you float, suspended by salt or calm or warmth, your body receives a message older than thought, a message that says you are safe now, you can let go. You do not need to carry your weight alone. Muscles relax, breath deepens. The mind, which grips so tightly to its endless spinning, begins to release. Even the sound of water, waves, rainfall, bubbling streams, has measurable effects on the nervous system. It lowers cortisol levels, it slows heart rate, it synchronizes brain waves to a rhythm closer to rest, closer to dream, closer to the state where healing can begin. There are entire therapies built around water now. Hydrotherapy, the use of water at various temperatures and pressures to stimulate circulation, improve mobility and relieve pain, is used for arthritis, injury recovery, paralysis. Aquatic therapy, gentle movement in pools guided by trained hands, helps those with trauma, with neurological conditions, with physical limitations find strength again. Sensory deprivation tanks, filled with warm salt water, remove light, sound, pressure, allowing the body and brain to enter deep states of meditation and repair. But beyond clinics and treatments, there is the everyday miracle of water, the way a shower at the end of a long day feels like forgiveness, how a cold splash on the face can break a spiral of panic, how a swim in a lake can return joy to a heart burdened by thought. Because water doesn't just carry heat or minerals or pressure, it carries presence. It demands that we meet it, not with our plans but with our breath. You cannot rush water, You cannot think your way through it. You have to feel it. And in that feeling, in that return to the body, the healing begins. Not by solving, but by softening, by reminding, by holding. This is why tears matter. Tears are water, yes, but more than that. They are the body's way of releasing pain, of expressing overwhelm when words fail. They carry salt, emotion, truth. They fall when we break, and when we break open, and when they are wiped away, not rejected, not hidden, but witnessed, we do not feel weaker, we feel seen, and even nature uses water to heal itself. Rain washes toxins from the air, rivers dilute and carry away pollutants, oceans absorb carbon and store heat, buffering the extremes of climate, wetlands filter impurities, drawing metals and poisons from runoff, cleaning what was broken by holding it still long enough for change to happen. Even the earth knows, sometimes healing is not in fire or wind or sun, but in the flow, the pull, the pause, and for the human spirit, which has learned to hold so much, grief, anxiety, fatigue, numbness, water offers something profound, the chance to be held in return, to sit by the sea and feel its endless rhythm, knowing that the waves do not care what you've done or failed to do, to wade into a river and let it carry your thoughts, your shame, your worry, downstream and out of reach, to cry without apology, to sweat without embarrassment, to immerse without armor, to be as you are, and find that it is enough. And when healing does not come easily, when the wounds are old or hidden, or layered in years of resistance, water does not demand change. It only offers space. Again and again, each tide returns, each rain falls, each drop, whether hot or cold, wild or gentle, asks nothing more than to touch your skin, to remind you that you are not solid stone, not beyond repair, not finished. You are porous, you are in motion, you are still becoming, and water, ancient and patient, waits to meet you wherever you are, to cleanse, to soothe, to soften, to carry, because sometimes healing is not found in a pill or a word or a solution. Sometimes it is found in the quiet presence of a stream, in the still mirror of a lake, in the embrace of a hot bath at midnight. Sometimes healing is simply remembering that you are made of water, and that you are allowed to flow again. Chapter 20. The Last Drop. Water's endless journey, and the memory of the world. There is no final drop, not truly, not in the story of water, for every molecule that falls to earth, every mist that rises, every breath exhaled into the air, becomes part of something else, goes on to somewhere new, continues the cycle that has turned since the beginning of time, before there was time, before there were names or skies or people to witness the rain. For water does not end. It transforms, it migrates, it whispers from one form into another, quietly persistent, forever in motion, forever old, forever beginning again. And so, as we reach the final chapter of this slow unfolding journey, not to conclude, but to pause, to take a long breath, and recognize where we are, we return to that truth. Water is not a substance we pass through, not a backdrop to the human story, but the medium of the story itself, the ink that writes it, the voice that tells it, the silence between the lines. The same water that once shimmered in the shallow seas of the Cambrian, now falls on your skin in summer rain. The same water that once steamed from the volcanic mouth of a newborn earth, now flows through your veins. The water that froze on the fur of mammoths, now waits in glaciers above you. The mist that once rose from the Nile, that once filled the lungs of dinosaurs, that once froze in Saturn's rings or clung to the windows of a spaceship. It has returned, again and again, falling, rising, drifting, absorbing, retreating, never vanishing, never ceasing. Water moves through everything, and because of that, it connects everything. It is the link between the ancient and the unborn, between the stone and the songbird, between the desert bloom and the ocean trench, between the sky and the skin. Even in the driest times of our lives, when nothing moves, when everything feels stuck, or parched or still, somewhere, deep within, or far beyond, water is moving, and with it, the promise that things will change, that seasons will turn, that nothing, not even silence, lasts forever. Because water has never once stayed still, even ice, that frozen dream, that held breath, is always imperceptibly shifting, groaning beneath its own weight, cracking softly in the night, pulling itself toward melt and motion. And steam, invisible, rising, escaping, is always the signal of something changing form, of energy being released, of transformation at the most intimate scale. And in you, even now, water is moving, between the cells of your brain, around the chambers of your heart, across the thin membranes of your lungs, responding to the rhythm of your breath, reflecting your emotions, carrying the echo of every experience you've lived and every place your ancestors walked. In this way, water is not only the substance of memory, it is memory itself. It holds the shape of the land in every carved canyon. It carries the story of the sky in every drop of rain. It remembers the heat of the sun, the chill of the pole, the weight of the mountain, the softness of moss. It holds the salt of ancient oceans, and the tears of children, not yet born. And in this way it is sacred, not in a mystical sense, but in the way a breath is sacred, or a heartbeat, or a sunrise, in the way that the most ordinary thing becomes holy when you finally stop and notice it, when you remember what it means, how it carries you, how it sustains everything you've ever loved. For without water, there is no tree, no blood, no wind, no song. Without water, there is no fire, no steam to drive turbines, no cloud to fall as snow, no sweat to cool the body as it labors to survive. Even flame owes its dance to the atoms water made. And so we come to the last drop, or rather to the idea of it. For in reality there is no last drop, no end to the cycle, only a handoff, a transition, a gentle continuation, as one form becomes another, as stream becomes cloud, becomes mountain, mist becomes ice again. Perhaps somewhere in the distant future, long after we are gone, a being unlike us, standing beneath a sky we never saw, on a planet that remembers the echo of Earth, will find a droplet clinging to the edge of a leaf, and that droplet will have once passed through our oceans and bodies and tears, and it will still hold some memory of the warmth of sunlight, and the shape of hands that once reached for it in wonder. Because water does not forget, it holds everything. It holds grief and joy, war and peace, the laughter of children and the salt of the wounded. It holds the story of the earth, not written in books or carved in stone, but flowing, rising, falling, repeating, always present, always changing. And so the next time you drink, let it be a communion, let it be a remembering, not just of thirst, but of origin. The next time you wash your face, let it be a kind of baptism, not into something new, but back into what you already are. The next time you walk in rain, listen, not just to the patter, but to the chorus of history falling around you. And when you dream, if you find yourself beside a river, or beneath a waterfall, or floating in an endless sea, know that it is not fantasy, it is your inheritance. For you were born of water, you live because of water, and one day your body will return its water to the world, and that gift, silent, clear, ancient, will become something else again, not an end, a beginning. Chapter 21. Water beneath our feet, the hidden rivers of the ground, beneath the surface of the earth, where light does not reach, and roots stretch downward, like fingers groping for memory. There lies a secret world of water, ancient, patient, unseen, a slow and silent ocean sealed within stone, flowing not in torrents but in pulses, in capillary threads, and hidden streams, in saturated soils and porous rock, where time moves differently, and the story of every drop becomes a record of centuries rather than days. This underground water, which we call groundwater, is not some recent miracle, but a presence older than cities, older than history, a body of liquid that has accumulated grain by grain, drip by drip, through fractures in bedrock, and between grains of sand, descending from the sky in rains long forgotten, filtering downward through layers of clay, silt, gravel, and limestone, until at last, it pools in vast reservoirs beneath the land, filling the empty spaces of the earth with a quiet persistence that few ever witness directly, yet upon which nearly half the world depends each day. Aquifers, the slow-beating hearts of this subterranean water world, are not vast lakes hidden beneath the ground, as some imagine, but networks of stone and sediment, where water clings to every surface, held by pressure and gravity, moving inch by inch through sandstone and shale, gathering in the spaces between mineral and time, storing the legacy of ancient weather patterns, of glacial melt, of forgotten floods, and vanished forests, all of it suspended beneath our feet, waiting. And when we dig, when we drill wells, sink pipes, tap springs, we are not merely accessing a resource, we are reaching into history itself, drawing up water that may have fallen, as rain before pyramids were built, water that has not seen sunlight in tens of thousands of years, water that has passed through layer after layer of stone, until it was filtered clean of memory, mineral-rich, clear, cold, and sacred. These underground systems, so often invisible to the surface eye, are among the most delicate and vital components of Earth's balance, for they are not replenished easily, and once emptied, they may take centuries to recover, if they recover at all, for recharge happens slowly, sometimes over generations, and when overdrawn, the land above can collapse, can sink, can lose its breath, as aquifers turn to empty voids, and soils compact under their own forgotten weight. In some places, like the vast Ogallala Aquifer of the American Midwest, or the fossil aquifers of North Africa and the Arabian Peninsula, we are drinking the water of an ancient world, not renewable in the human time frame, not refilled by today's rains, but drawn from a storehouse of prehistoric storms, a silent inheritance from an earth that no longer exists in the same shape or rhythm, and every gallon drawn is a subtraction from a past that cannot be rebuilt. And yet in other places, the groundwater breathes in rhythm with the sky, replenished each year by seasonal rains, by snow melt seeping down through mountain forests, by wetlands that overflow gently and offer their gift to the earth. But even this balance is fragile, easily broken by overuse, by pavement and concrete that seal the ground from receiving the sky, by pollution that seeps into the soil and corrupts what once flowed clean and clear. What makes groundwater so haunting is the way it hides in plain sight, how it is everywhere and nowhere, how it sustains rivers in dry months, how it feeds springs that emerge with no visible source, how it wells up in oases in the heart of deserts, how it quietly fills the roots of crops and trees that bloom without rainfall, how it is there even when we forget to thank it, a quiet companion to all life that lives above, and the creatures that live in these dark, saturated worlds, blind cave fish, with skin like pearl, translucent eels, bacteria that digest stone and metal, remind us that life adapts not only to what is visible and known, but to silence, to pressure, to a world without light, without surface, without song, where survival becomes a hymn of patience and transformation. Water beneath the earth also shapes what lies above, carving out vast underground networks, caves that echo with drips that fall once every 100 years, caverns filled with crystal formations taller than trees, passages that breathe air like lungs, cool and wet and still, all of it created by the simple, slow motion of water dissolving stone, widening fractures, moving unseen but always at work, always reshaping the deep places of the world. And when earthquakes come, or mountains shift, it is often this underground water that lubricates the movement, that weakens faults or strengthens them, that flows into the cracks made by tectonic stress, and becomes both destroyer and healer, a gentle hand that can soothe or shatter, depending on its pressure, its presence, its purpose. Some ancient cities, long since buried or abandoned, were built directly over springs, over wells that once ran clear, but now lie dry, and in those ruins, Archaeologists do not merely look for stone or metal, but for the memory of water, for signs of its presence, for the way it dictated the placement of homes, of roads, of temples, of everything, because even then it was understood that without water beneath, nothing above could survive. And now, in a world of rising temperatures and growing thirst, we are turning more than ever to what lies below, drilling deeper, reaching further, hoping that the earth still holds enough water to see us through the droughts, the heat, the failing rains. But in doing so, we must remember that groundwater is not an infinite well, but a slow conversation with the past. And if we speak too loudly, if we take too much, we silence that voice forever. To protect it is to think not in years, but in centuries. To honor it is to recognize that the quiet things, the hidden, the buried, the slow, are often the most essential. And when you walk across a field or a forest, or a city street, know this: beneath you, water moves, slowly, invisibly, purposefully, carrying minerals, feeding roots, remembering the sky, preparing to rise again. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday, when the earth is ready. Because the journey of water is never one-directional, never complete, never final. It is always becoming, always listening, always returning, and even underground where it flows in darkness, it is dreaming of light. Chapter 22. The Sky's Secret Wells. How water moves through air. Above us, though we rarely pause to consider it, there is another ocean, not of waves and salt and tides, but of vapor, invisible and weightless in its presence, vast in its reach, carried on wind and pressure and heat, a body of water suspended in the sky itself, moving not in rivers we can see but in currents of breath and temperature, flowing over mountains, across deserts, between continents, whispering through the layers of atmosphere with a quiet purpose, older than thought. For the air above us is not dry, not empty, not passive, but soaked in water, alive with it, rich with potential that falls as rain or snow or hail, condenses into clouds, forms storms that rage, or float peacefully, all of it part of a cycle, so vast and slow, that we forget the sky is always in motion, always exhaling the memory of oceans below. When we look up at the clouds, we do not often realize we are watching water, not just mist or fog, but tiny suspended droplets and crystals that form when warm, humid air rises, cools, and condenses, clustering around microscopic particles like dust or salt or pollen, becoming visible only when enough of them gather together to refract light. And yet these clouds are not still. They are always shifting, growing, dissolving, moving at speeds that defy the illusion of a quiet sky, sometimes carrying moisture for thousands of kilometers before releasing it, sometimes holding it for weeks, bending with the wind, shaped by mountains and coastlines and heat. And it is not only clouds that carry water. The very air we breathe is saturated to some degree, varying by temperature and altitude and season. And this water vapor plays an essential role in everything from weather patterns to heat retention, for it is the most powerful greenhouse gas on Earth, absorbing and radiating heat more effectively than carbon dioxide, though it does not persist in the atmosphere the way CO2 does. Instead, it cycles quickly, rising and falling in a dance with temperature and pressure, amplifying warming or cooling, depending on the balance of forces in motion. This vapor, light though it seems, has weight. At any given moment, the sky above each square meter of Earth holds several kilograms of water, more than enough to sustain life, to nourish fields, to flood cities. And when conditions align, when air is cooled or lifted, or destabilized, this water falls as precipitation, the final stage in a journey that began perhaps in a distant ocean, then rose into vapor under sunlight, traveled high and far through the troposphere, merged with other currents, and finally returned to Earth, as a drop on your window or a flake on your tongue, or a deluge that carves the land anew. And in the tropics, where warm air dominates and evaporation is constant, The sky holds even more vast rivers of moisture that flow invisibly overhead, called atmospheric rivers, carrying the volume of dozens of Mississippi rivers at once, capable of bringing sudden storms or long rains to faraway regions, shaping the fate of crops and cities alike, reminders that water does not obey human borders or timetables, but moves with the pulse of Earth itself. Even deserts, dry though they appear, lie beneath air that often holds moisture. The problem is not always the absence of vapor, but the failure of conditions needed for condensation, for uplift, for cloud formation. And so the sky above a barren land may still be full of water, a silent ocean that never quite touches the ground, a presence felt but not received. And yet, human beings have learned to read this sky water, to track humidity, to model vapor transport, to predict rainfall days or even weeks in advance, and increasingly to harvest it directly, using fog nets in coastal deserts, to collect droplets from mist, or condensation devices that cool air to extract fresh water, where none exists on the ground, mimicking the ancient practices of civilizations that once built dew-collecting stones or carved catchments into rock to gather the sky's slow offerings. The air in this sense is not merely a carrier, it is a source. It holds enough water to sustain all life on Earth, if only we could reach it gently, without stealing, without damaging the balance. And yet, like all water systems, the atmosphere is sensitive. Changes in temperature, deforestation, pollution, and urban heat, islands alter the way vapor moves, the way clouds form, the way storms build or fail to form at all. And so as the planet warms, we are beginning to see patterns shift, rains arriving in different places, falling harder or not at all, skies growing thicker with humidity, yet stingier with their gifts, as the feedback loops of climate begin to feed themselves more rapidly than before. Still, even in this chaos, there is a kind of beauty, the monsoon that builds for weeks before breaking open in joy, the thundercloud that towers 30 kilometers into the sky like a floating mountain, the fog that drifts through the forest like a ghost made visible, the moment after a storm when the air smells of rain, of earth, of lightning, of light, all of it born in vapor, in sky, in the hidden well above us. And we, as bodies made mostly of water, are drawn to these things, to the sound of rain, to the coolness of mist, to the deep comfort of a cloudy day, perhaps because something within us recognizes that we are not separate from the sky, that the vapor it holds has passed through us before, will do so again, that we are as much a part of the atmosphere as the trees or rivers or clouds, breathing in water, and breathing it out again, a cycle within a cycle, a drop within the cloud. And when the rain comes, sudden, soft, violent, steady, it is the sky remembering its promise, returning what it borrowed, reminding the world below that nothing is truly gone, only in motion, only waiting, because even the air holds ocean, and those oceans, though invisible, are no less vast, no less sacred, no less part of the story that has no end. Chapter 23. Rivers of Time, How Water Remembers the Shape of the Land. When you follow the path of a river, when you trace its slow bends and abrupt turns, when you stand at its edge and watch the current twist around rocks or pull at the roots of trees clinging to the bank, you are not simply observing water. You are witnessing the memory of 1,000 storms, the scars of mountains worn down grain by grain, the dialogue between gravity and erosion and flow. For rivers are not just the consequence of water moving downhill, they are the long-written biography of a landscape etched in motion, in sediment, in silence, and in flood. And their course is shaped not only by what lies beneath them, but by what has happened before. A river does not forget where it came from. It begins as meltwater from a glacier, or as raindrops sliding across leaves and gathering in rivulets, or as a spring that rises gently from the ground, and in those early moments its path is open, its direction malleable. But as it gathers force, as it merges with tributaries and learns the pull of gravity more intimately, it begins to carve, to cut, to choose, and each choice becomes permanent, or nearly so, unless the earth itself shifts. unless a mountain falls, or a fault line tears open, and even then the river will attempt to return to its shape, its memory, the line it has traced for centuries or millennia. Rivers are among the most ancient travelers of the earth, older than most forests, older than cities, older even than some mountains, flowing in the same general paths long after glaciers have come and gone, long after civilizations have risen and collapsed on their banks. And in this way, they are not only features of geography, but vessels of time, repositories of history, carrying not only water, but minerals and bones and seeds and the dust of distant lands, remembering every tree that once stood, every stone that fell into their path, every season of drought, every year of flood. And though they appear to rush and twist and dance, rivers are creatures of law and constraint. They respond to slope, to friction, to volume and speed, and over time they create patterns that are not chaotic, but deeply ordered, deeply mathematical, deeply beautiful, forming braided channels and oxbow lakes, floodplains and deltas, each a record of how water negotiates with the land, of how the present shape of a river is not a random scribble, but a signature left by time itself. The Grand Canyon, with its impossible scale and staggering walls, is not the work of wind or tectonics alone. It is the patient labor of the Colorado River, which over millions of years cut downward through stone that was once seabed, layer by layer, carrying away the past and exposing the deeper past below, until what remained was not just a channel, but a cathedral to erosion, a monument to what water can do if given time and silence and persistence. In floodplains, the river writes another kind of story, one of fertility, of renewal, of death followed by abundance, as it spills over its banks in the wet season, depositing silt and sand and nutrients, reshaping the land not by carving it away but by rebuilding it anew, creating soil rich enough to feed empires, as it did for the Nile, the Ganges, the Tigris and Euphrates, rivers whose yearly floods brought not only crops but not only mud, but meaning, teaching those who lived beside them that water was not just a resource but a rhythm, a god, a teacher of patience and reverence. And yet, rivers are not immutable. They meander, shift course, erode one bank and deposit on another, move slowly over generations, changing their own past, erasing old paths and creating new ones, leaving behind dry beds and hidden channels underground. And when we look at satellite images, we can still see their ghosts, the forgotten arms and loops, the stories they once told before some event. A dam, an earthquake, a flood, turned the narrative in a different direction. To walk beside a river is to walk beside a creature in motion, a vein of the earth carrying not blood but memory, and in that flow are all the stories of upstream and downstream, of what once lived and what was washed away, of gold dust and fish spawn and fallen leaves, and bits of plastic and forgotten toys, all of it moving towards some mouth, some ocean, where the river's story ends not in silence but in reunion. And just as the land shapes the river reshapes the land. It hollows valleys, flattens hills, breaks apart stone too proud to bend, gathers sediment in its curve and fans it out in wide deltas where it finally meets the sea, not as surrender, but as fulfillment, as completion, as the long-awaited return of fresh water to salt, of story to source. And when we dam rivers, divert them, pave over their banks, contain them in concrete, we do not merely disrupt flow, we interrupt memory, we break the conversation between water and land, and though we may gain electricity, irrigation, control, we also lose something older, the voice of the river that once whispered to the forest, to the heron, to the soil, to the people who bathed in its shallows and drank from its edge. Rivers are not machines, they are not pipes for our convenience, they are living records, flowing storytellers, and every bend they trace is a decision made between force and resistance, between speed and weight, between past and possibility. And so when you stand beside a river, even one small and quiet, even one surrounded by buildings or fences or roads, you are standing in the presence of something older than your name, something that remembers when this place was wild, when this place was forest, when this place was sky. And if you listen, you may hear it still, the sound of movement, the sound of memory, the sound of time itself, flowing past. Chapter 24. Ice that breathes. Glaciers, memory, and the slowest waters of Autumn. I in the frozen silence of mountain peaks and polar wastelands, where sunlight glances off a white so bright it seems to hum, where wind carves sculptures no hand has ever touched, where time itself feels paused beneath the weight of snow packed layer upon layer. For centuries, there lies a kind of water unlike any other, not in motion like rivers, not free like rain, not vaporous like cloud, but held in a deep, ancient stillness, in a body of frozen breath, a memory encased in ice, that speaks not in rushing or falling or flowing, but in the quiet pressure of what it means to wait, to hold, to remember. For glaciers are the slowest rivers on earth, the deepest reservoirs of time, the sacred libraries of water's long, unfolding story. A glacier is not merely a block of frozen snow, it is a process, a system, a force, a moving body formed from countless storms, each snowfall compacted under the weight of those that came before, crushed into dense crystalline ice that flows, imperceptibly but powerfully, down mountainsides and across valleys, carving the stone beneath, grinding boulders into silt, reshaping the world not with speed but with persistence, with cold, with the inexhaustible patience of water held in stillness for thousands of years, and then, inch by inch given motion. And yet, though they move, glaciers do not move like rivers, for they do not respond to gravity alone, but to internal deformation, to the pressure of their own mass, to melt water that lubricates their base, and so they glide forward with a kind of silent intention, a breath held for centuries, finally exhaled across the landscape, dragging with them the debris of mountains, the history of wind and snow and volcanic ash, caught in layers like pages of an unwritten book. Within that ice are bubbles, tiny capsules of ancient air sealed by time, holding the exact composition of the atmosphere from when the snow first fell, meaning that glaciers are not only made of water, but of memory, of trapped light and silence, of long-vanished winds, and the exhalations of extinct forests. And when scientists core down into these frozen columns, they are not merely retrieving samples, they are unlocking the breath of worlds long gone, measuring the pulse of climate across millennia, reading the fluctuations of carbon dioxide and methane, of temperature and pollen and dust, all of it held in this frozen whisper that the glacier keeps, until asked to speak. And though glaciers appear eternal, massive, unmoving, otherworldly in their purity, they are vulnerable, they are living, they are melting. As the world war, these icy giants are retreating, not with violence, but with disappearance, and each year we lose more than we can measure, more ice becoming water, more snow melt surging down mountains earlier than it should, more rivers swelling and drying in strange patterns, more seas rising with the contributions of frozen lands that never knew the touch of ocean before. The great ice sheets of Greenland and Antarctica, vast enough to affect gravity itself, are no longer stable. They crack and carve and hemorrhage glaciers into the sea, while in the Himalayas and Andes and Alps, smaller glaciers that have fed rivers for generations are shrinking, pulling back their tongues from the valleys they carved, leaving behind dry stone and dusty plains, where there was once a mirrored world of blue shadows and crystalline silence. And when a glacier melts, it is not just a loss of water, it is a loss of equilibrium. Entire ecosystems depend on the slow release of meltwater through summer months. Entire cities depend on glacial runoff for drinking, irrigation, electricity, and as the glaciers fade, these systems falter, becoming unpredictable, unstable, sometimes violent in their response, with flash floods and landslides and droughts, rippling outward from a mountaintop no longer cloaked in ice. But still, in the high places, some glaciers remain, massive, creaking, breathing under their own weight, and to stand beside one, to place your hand on the cold surface of something that began falling as snow 10,000 years ago, is to touch deep time, to recognize that you are not merely alive in the present, but connected to a lineage of water that stretches back through ages of ice and fire, through extinction and evolution, through the long shaping of continents by things that move slowly enough to outlast nations, yet powerfully enough to create valleys and shape coasts, and reflect the sun back into space, in shimmering waves of light. And though they are frozen, glaciers are not still inside beneath the surface. There are hidden channels, blue tunnels where meltwater rushes through sculpted ice, echoing like heartbeats, lit from above by refracted sunlight in a spectrum of impossibly cold colors, and these rivers beneath the ice carve as surely as those above, guiding the glacier's course, feeding the streams that emerge at the snout, and give rise to the rivers that eventually join oceans far away. In the mythology of old cultures, from the Inuit to the Andean to the Tibetan, glaciers were alive, were gods, were spirits that must be respected and appeased, for they were the source of life and destruction alike. And in those beliefs there was wisdom, a recognition that these frozen rivers are not inert, not dead, but breathing, acting, waiting, responding, and now retreating. And so the question is not only what will happen as they vanish, it is what they have already seen, what storms are recorded in their layers, what droughts and eruptions and strange summers lie waiting to be read, what echoes of ancient forests, ancient fires, ancient migrations rest inside the ice we call eternal. When we lose a glacier, we lose more than cold, we lose memory, calibration, rhythm, we lose a counterweight to the heat of the world, we lose a witness. And yet perhaps we are still in time to listen, to preserve what remains, to revere what is left, to see glaciers not just as melting water, but as the living archives of Earth's breath, as the guardians of a balance we have only begun to understand, as the sacred lungs of high places. Because when water freezes, it does not die, it holds its breath, and when it melts it does not forget, it returns, changed, slower, wiser, bearing the stories of ice. And still it flows. Chapter 25. The Last Ocean, where water ends and begins again. Far beyond the mountains and rivers, beyond the clouds and the falling rain, beyond the melt of glaciers and the winding veins of groundwater, beyond every drop we've followed and every mist we've seen rise, there lies the oldest and deepest memory of all. The ocean, vast and endless, not just a body of water, but the body of the world itself, the great blue mirror of Earth's soul, the womb from which all life emerged, the final resting place of rivers, the final breath of glaciers, the collector of skyfall and runoff and dream. And though we often speak of the ocean as a thing, as one mass, as a singular expanse, it is in truth an endless unfolding, a system so immense, so intricate, so alive that to stand before it is to feel time, pause, and the self dissolve into something ancient and complete. The ocean is not merely where water gathers, it is where water transforms. It is the birthplace of clouds, where sunlight pulls vapor into the sky with invisible hands, lifting warmth from waves to form the seeds of weather, of rain, of rivers to come. It is the furnace of climate, storing heat in its surface and slowly releasing it into air and current, driving wind patterns and jet streams, guiding monsoons and hurricanes, balancing the burning breath of the sun with the slow exhale of deep blue depths. It is the regulator of carbon, absorbing it from atmosphere, pulling it into phytoplankton, into shells, into sediment that will one day become stone. The ocean, silently and without praise, buffering the damage of centuries, cooling what would otherwise burn, cradling our failure with grace we do not deserve. And beneath its surface, deeper than any mountain is tall, lie trenches, so dark and cold and crushing that no light has ever touched them, and yet there too, life thrives, strange, luminous, patient life that does not need sunlight to dream. that draws energy from chemicals seeping from Earth's crust, from the heat of creation itself, and in that darkness, water moves still, in thermohaline currents, that take 1,000 years to complete, a single cycle, as cold salty water sinks, and flows along the ocean floor, only to rise in distant upwelling zones, bringing nutrients and memory to the surface once more. Every breath you take, every second one of your cells turns oxygen into life. You owe to the ocean, not only to the trees, but to the vast blooming forests beneath the waves, to the microscopic phytoplankton, that though invisible to the naked eye, produce more than half the oxygen in the air, cycling carbon, feeding fish, dying, and falling to feed the deep. And yet we treat the ocean as an edge, as the place where land ends, as something separate from us. But that is illusion, for we are always connected to it, not only through the water in our blood, and the salt on our skin, but through the tides that tug at the moon in our bones, through the way a storm in the Pacific becomes a dry spell in the Sahel, through the way an oil spill in one corner becomes a wound for species in another, because the ocean is not isolated, it is whole, it is circulatory, it is communal, it is one body breathing in loops too large to see but too important to forget, and still it calls to us in the crash of surf, in the rhythm of waves that echo the rhythm of breath, in the sound of shells held to the ear, where we hear not merely noise, but the hum of origin. To float in the sea is to return to a place before memory, to be held not by surface, but by substance, by the same fluid that cradled the first creatures to ever stir, that carried fish, and coral and whales into becoming, that once flowed through gills and now through lungs, through fins, and now through hands. But the ocean does not end. It is not a conclusion, not a destination, not a graveyard of rivers, but a gateway to the beginning again, because when rivers end in the ocean, they do not disappear. Their water rises, evaporates, becomes cloud, becomes storm, becomes lake and river and mist again. And so the story of water never ends at the sea. It passes through, it pauses, it dreams, and it continues, even now, as we witness the ocean rising, not with the grace of tide, but with the urgency of imbalance. We are reminded that nothing we do is ever content, that the plastic we throw away does not vanish, that the heat we trap does not forgive, that the pollution we spill comes back in rain, and tide, in coral bleaching, and fish migration, in acidification, and storm surge, and the drowning of islands, whose names we will never learn but whose loss is already echoing in the bones of the planet. Still the ocean gives, still it absorbs, still it reflects the stars at night, still and when we sit by its edge, tired, wondering, quiet, we are not sitting beside something alien, we are sitting beside ourselves, because the ocean is our past, and it may be our future, and it is always our present. So as this story nears its final page, let us remember, not to end, not to forget, but to return, to the beginning, to the spring, to the drop on a leaf, to the fog that kisses the mountain, to the snow that falls like breath, to the aquifer dreaming in darkness, to the river winding its long path home, to the tide that never stops, to the water within us, that has traveled farther than our names will ever go. Water does not stop, it becomes.